Rotorua, ko I tēnei ngā nui kia koutou. I would like to welcome everybody to the meeting this day, the 1st of October. I'd like to actually thank also the public, the staff. We've got our Lakes Community Board Chair and also the media for being present today, so welcome to everyone. This meeting is being live streamed, and just a request to turn off mobile phones, and we will take a break for morning tea and also for lunchtime. Our morning break will happen about 11 a.m, all things going to schedule. I would like to open with the karakia this morning. Kia ora rawari, ngā mihi nui. Any apologies this morning? Yes, Councillor. Oh, ka pai. Aroha for lateness, and Councillor Bentley. Thank you very much. There appear to be no other apologies. I ask for a mover. Moved by Councillor Yates, seconded by Councillor Rotorua. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Carried. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? There appear to be none. Are there any urgent items? Yes, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. Given the widespread public concern over the costs of the Hemo Gorge sculpture that's now installed, how soon can costs be put to the public domain? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McPherson. I believe that all the public information is out there, but we've got a point of order. Your Worship, the Mayor.
I'm sure it's the Chair's ruling that this isn't an urgent item and all the costings have been put before Council.
Yes, and so just to reiterate, it is all of the public information is out there. But I will allow you, if you would like, to catch up with the staff afterwards if you wanted to have a refresh on what those costs are. Any other urgent items not on the agenda? There appear to be none. We now go to page 6, confirmation of minutes from the operations of September, and a big thank you to Councillor Yates for filling in and chairing that meeting. Do I have a mover and a seconder to confirm those minutes? Moved Councillor Maxwell, seconded by Councillor Donaldson, that the minutes 3rd of September 2020 be confirmed as a true and correct record. All those aye, carried. Report. Financial performance for the 2 months ended 31st of August. To receive the report, I'll just ask for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Mr. Waru, seconded Councillor McPherson. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. I now invite Thomas to overview the report.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, councillors and board members. Thought I'd try something a little bit different with the presentation today, and have created a dashboard for us, which is a bit of a format that we'll use going forward. And on completion of it and putting it up, I realised that it'll be difficult to read. So in anticipation of this problem, I've broken it down into the individual components. So just on that, the actual performance itself. So revenues are slightly ahead again of budget. There is pressure in the fees and charges, predominantly as a result of the COVID and the latest lockdown on parking revenues. But again, rates and particularly around the water by metre and some of the penalty charges are ahead of budget. So they're combining overall to provide a favourable position. Our operating costs are 2 months in fairly on track, but slightly over budget. There's a little bit of pressure in depreciation, which is obviously a non-cash expense, which will continue for the remainder of the year. But the one item within there is probably around contractors and consultants, and that's costs that is supporting the housing projects. So that's putting a little bit of pressure on the budgets as well, and just something that we'll monitor and keep track of as the year. But overall, outside of those two challenges at the moment, progressing fairly well. And obviously, therefore, combining to a result that's $11,000 behind budget, so quite pleasing. When you look at it from an activity perspective, so the challenges that I described, so there's no surprise that of all our groups of activities, there's two that are under pressure, one planning and regulatory. So that's obviously where the parking revenue sits, and also some of the costs associated to planning changes and supporting, as an example, Plan Change 2 for Pukehangi and those issues and challenges around those housing projects. And sewerage, which is on the back of extra depreciation as a result of the revaluation of the assets at the end of the last fiscal year, and just some minor electricity charges which we're monitoring. So we don't think electricity will be as much of a problem this year as it was in previous after having fixed it, but there just seems to be a little bit of a challenge there at the moment, which we're keeping an eye on. Fees and charges. So we thought we'd give you an idea of obviously where our fees and charges at the moment are predominantly coming from. As you can imagine, with the EEC close, that area itself will lag behind, and obviously the museum and Shimpak, with the work that's ahead of them, there's a fair chunk of fees and charges that we would normally get in a normal year that aren't there. But overall, they're tracking quite well and close to budgets and where we expect them to be. Waste services, those are the trade waste charges, and again with the latest lockdown that we had when we went to level 2 and 3, just some of those inspections and so forth dropped off. So we expect them to recover, and building services and the likes, as you can see, is tracking well ahead, as well as, the other way around, close to budgets. So again, the only real pressure point there in our external revenues, non-rates revenues, is the parking. From a key expense line, and usually an item of interest for people around our staff costs. So overall, our staff costs are tracking quite well and sitting favourably against budget. There is a little bit of a pressure point in the strategy group, and once again, that's the group that's supporting the Housing and Thriving Communities initiatives and has obviously increased its resourcing to support those. So that group itself is sitting in a little bit of an unfavourable position against budget, but the other groups within the organisation are favourable against budget and are therefore offsetting and supporting the cost pressures in those areas. From a capital perspective, and the graph on the right is probably the interesting one, and I'll go into a little bit more detail of what we do in that space. But we're just lagging a little bit behind for the year to date. So again, just off the back of the lockdown again and just ramping up a little bit, we are seeing some pressures, with regards to getting the work done. But overall, the majority of the work is progressing well, and in particular our renewal program is progressing well, with the exception of probably the water activity, which is about to ramp up with a significant number of work that's now gone out to tender and been awarded and about to start. The graph in the corner is what we call our capital procurement planner. So what we do at the start of every year is we look at our capital works program, and we sit down with the organisation, our procurement team and our project managers, and we ask the organisation with regards to when you anticipate doing this work. So when are you going to put your procurement plan together? When are you going to go to tender? When are you likely to have that tender awarded, and when are you likely to start that work? And we build that profile of how we anticipate to do our work. And so the dark blue, which is the AP 2021, is how the budgets have been phased. And the darker, which is procurement, is how the organisation actually sees us doing that work. And that's at times they're a little bit out of sync, and that's just, I guess, a reflection of the difference of when we go to procurement and so forth. And then we track how we actually go with that actual. And so that starts those discussions going and ensuring that we're being proactive with our spending. So the team goes back to the organisation with regards to, you said you were going to go out this month on this work. Why haven't you? What can we do to help assist you and to really help drive our capital works program forward? So again, it's a little bit behind at this time of year, but if we look at a little bit of the detail as to why that is, it's predominantly sitting in two of our projects. And so these 10 make up our top 10 projects with regards to size of spend. And if we start at the bottom, obviously the bigger ones, the lakefront is progressing well, but we did obviously have some challenges around lockdown and reactivating itself. But it is lagging a little bit behind with regards to the anticipated spend, even though it is progressing quite well. The museum, again, we're just at the point where there's a peer review being undertaken with regards to some structural elements as a requirement of the building consent. So therefore, the anticipated speed of that project is lagging a little bit behind of where we expected. The Whakaweriwa Forest project is actually progressing really well, but the element of underspend there is related purely to the visitor centre component, and there's work undertaken there with CNI with regards to how to progress that one. But overall, that project is now sitting at about, outside of that element and some of the cultural overlay, sitting at about 99% completed. Rotorua progressing well, and et cetera, et cetera. So while on that previous slide it showed that we were lagging a little bit behind, that lag really is clustered in some of those key projects, which visually, and as you can see as well, actually are progressing at pace, but probably not at the pace that we thought it would be at the start of the year when we set these budgets. With regards to our renewal spend, again, our renewals are progressing quite well. As I said before, the water supplies work lagging a little bit behind budget, but a lot of that work has now been awarded and will commence over the summer period. And sport and rec are pretty much the same once again. So a lot of those spends are weather dependent, and so we expect those to catch up over the coming months. So what does that all mean with regards to our debt trajectory? So this is the trajectory that we're forecasting for the year. So it is in line with the annual plan. So you recall at the start of the year, we were carrying about $20 million of additional debt as a result of that pre-funding during the COVID lockdown and in anticipation of the unknown. Hence why, as that debt matures and that cash that we're holding on hand will be used to repay that down, our debt will reduce down, and it actually has to that point. But as the capital works program gears up in full in earnest over the coming summer months, we expect therefore the requirement to draw down on debt to support that capital works program will come about, and we anticipate therefore our debt, subject to how our capital work program progresses, to be in line with what the annual plan is showing. So about a $20 million increase by the end of the year to about $250 million. So just I thought I'd share some insights as well with regards to some of the things that we're looking at. So when we look at the financials and what the impacts are on an organisation, we don't just obviously look back at our actual results, but we also look at what's happening in and around the world. And so some of the themes that we're actually seeing is, and many of you would have seen this, but technically, and no one has said it, but New Zealand entered into a recession as a result of the GDP decline of about 12.2% in the last quarter. Now, it was noted that New Zealand as a whole probably had a worse decline than some of our neighbouring OECD countries. But as we also know, we locked down a lot harder than them and came out a lot stronger. So the anticipation from a lot of the economists is that the GDP results for the quarters after this will actually show a stronger bounce back that some of our neighbours and other countries will see. From an interest rate point of view, and just before this meeting was actually looking at how we would look to refinance that additional debt we're taking on this year. We're actually seeing our total cost of borrowing funds that could potentially drop below 3% by the end of the year. And that's as we're seeing debt tranches that start with 5s, that were quite long-term debt that we've held, being replaced with things like that start with 1s, 1.5 for 10 years, and etc. Or even shorter, we're in a position whereby, as the markets have changed, we can borrow even below 1% now. And that's that little chart on the right-hand side, which is, my apologies, it is difficult to read, but what we have seen recently is a significant reduction in interest rates and the cost of borrowing, off the back of obviously the OCR being incredibly low. And what New Zealand has seen as well is it's seen its first negative yield trade in the New Zealand market, and that's never happened before in New Zealand. And what it effectively says is that I will give you the money and loan it, but I won't get any interest cost. You just give me my money back at the end. And so people are seeking security over return. And so it's an interesting development with New Zealand. It is common overseas already in European countries, particularly with some really big multinationals that dominate the world. People do that already with them, but for New Zealand it's unique. And it's an indication of where this will likely go. And so the indications are that interest rates will fall even further than they are now. And obviously that the benefit of that will flow through to us as well. And then looking globally around future trends. And so what some of the big merchant bankers and organisations are talking about is that the world economy will effectively change and pivot. And they believe 3 things that will be focused on the biggest change. So delivery of education will probably move from on-premise to online, and how technology and people will evolve to that. Healthcare, again, is seeing that same thing. And I think there was an article even in the Daily Post the other day with, I think, Dr. Harry Pert talking about that as well with regards to technology and being able to see more patients through leveraging technology versus patients coming into their building. And also the pursuit of happiness. So those that haven't been affected and those that are unable to travel, expenditure that relates to the pursuit of happiness is seeing a very high demand. And you're seeing that as well within the New Zealand economy. The rumours are spa pools are selling out and hard to get. I know from a personal experience, mountain bikes are also incredibly hard to get. Now, whether that's a modal shift as well versus a demand, but you are seeing certain items in the economy that are huge demand for as people's behaviours change. And the interesting thing is of a couple of those elements is the strong correlation between Rotorua, our point of difference, Vision 2030, and particularly our environment, and with regards to attracting those individuals back into our region. Just some stats from Infometrics, and you recall during lockdown and preparation of the annual plan, we talked about a lot of things of how Rotorua would be impacted. And one of those challenges as well was when we talked about, I think 23% of our workforce was in tourism, I think 10% was in hospitality and 10% was in retail. So 43% of our workforce are working for businesses that have either been significantly affected or partially affected, with regards to the in and out of those lockdowns. It's no real surprise then that in some measures we are doing better than the national averages, but in a lot of the measures we're actually being hit harder. And so from a GDP perspective, when tourism makes up, while we have quite a diverse GDP, tourism makes up a big portion of it. It's no real surprise, therefore, that we took a slightly bigger hit than some of the other regions, or than the Bay of Plenty overall and the New Zealand average. And unfortunately, therefore, from an unemployment perspective, and with all those staff pretty much working in tourism in particular, we're seeing a higher proportion of unemployment in comparison as well. And then across the board, some of those metrics we're generally, therefore, slightly worse off. And so a lot of that, I guess, is tied to the program of works that we have in place with regards to housing, thriving communities, the economic recovery as well, making sure, therefore, that the things that we do as an organisation on behalf of our community are done in a way that mitigates, soften and address some of the things that we're seeing going forward. But I thought I'd just share those elements with you. So on that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. I do like your line in there that you're cautiously optimistic at this quarter, and it is better than projected, especially after the COVID environment. An interesting observation, and I don't know where the costs have flowed through, that so many must have been an impact on transport and travel costs because we're all Zooming. Has that started to flow through yet? Not many of us are flying anywhere, and we've opted on to Zoom instead as an alternative. That must start to flow through in staff costs.
Yes, we've, as an organisation, really leveraged technology, and we as a whole have probably not returned to where we were as pre-COVID, and we're having a lot more still Zoom meetings and so forth rather than travelling. So I think as a whole, travel costs don't really make up a large portion of our operating budget, so it's probably, while we are seeing savings, it's not probably a noticeable impact that you would expect to see.
Yeah.
Might be an interesting point for the carbon audit report that we do in terms of lower emissions. We go to Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. I much appreciate your report, particularly the way you've embedded into the Infometrics analysis. That's very helpful. I know that current debt is about the 225 million mark. In October, November, it's going to bottom at about 220, but by May, June next year, it'll be 250 million. First question is, what's the new ceiling? I understand it's going to be around about the 300 million. Is there any thought being given to how we might avoid increasing our debt, even though money is getting extraordinarily cheap? But that won't last forever. So I guess my question is, to what extent can the underspend in Capex, which I regard as laudable austerity, can that be maintained and perhaps contribute to debt retirement? Thank you.
I think this is, Councillor, for you, Chair, this is a bit of a discussion around the next LTP and the workshops that we're having. So, and bearing in mind that we're 3 months into the new annual plan for this year, and that annual plan was really there to support the Build Back Better, to support our economy, and to keep doing what we were doing. And so the strategy this year is not to underspend with a view of retiring debt. So we anticipate at the moment that we hope to deliver the majority of our capital works program, and so therefore that debt will be required. I think the question that you ask is one that you should probably bring into the LTP workshops rather than at this forum, and I believe that that's the appropriate forum for it.
Thank you. You can count on it.
Thank you for your answer, Thomas. Were there any other questions? Councillor Kaifong, followed by Councillor Donald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question regarding consultants' fees, because obviously the housing strategy is our major focus for the next few years. So you mentioned that there was a significant increase in use of consultants to support the housing strategy and that the strategy team was under pressure. So is that the best use of resources in terms of trying to get some traction with that strategy and getting houses built?
We believe so. So as an example, last week there was the resource consent hearing for Plan Change 2 in Pukehangi, which was being fast-tracked. So you'll recall that was here for 3 days, and so a lot of that expenditure that we talked about is staff and consultants that are supporting that process. So those are the sorts of elements with regards to when I talk about that as supporting those sorts of activities. Yep.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, thanks, Thomas. My question is just in relation to the year-to-date performance summary and revenues, and a term I've not seen before, rates revenue up due to run rate. Could you enlighten me as to what run rate means? And I'm also interested in the level of uptake of the 2% discount for paying the full year in advance. Have you got any idea or sense of the uptake of that? Thank you.
Yep. Hopefully my business performance manager, Pete, who helped write this report, listened to that query with regards to the use of run rate. Effectively, what it's saying is just timing against how the budget has been phased. So that's his colloquial way of saying that. With regards to the uptake of the rates discount, we had a look at the collection of the first rates instalment for this year, and we compared it to the previous 2 years as what was happening. And from a percentage, from a collection point of view and how things are collected on a percentage basis, it was pretty much identical to the previous 2 years. So we were thinking with regards to the timing of that lockdown for Auckland and us moving back to level 2 that there would be an impact on that instalment on the 20th of August, but the collection rate was pretty much identical to the previous 2 years.
Thank you. Mr. Waru.
Kia ora tātou, tēnā koe te tiamana. Actually, Councillor Kai Whang kind of stole the thunder a bit from my question. However, I had to think of something else that I could add to that, because we know consultants' fees and things can sort of blow our budgets quite a bit there. So I was just wondering if you knew, who are these experts that you mentioned in your report?
Oh, look, and it's a wide range, but it includes legal consultants as well. So it's a whole range. It's not a team of consultants specifically brought in to undertake actions on our behalf. So, it can cover a whole range of things, even through to, as an example, the engineers that support us in the discussions around the stormwater requirements. So it could be a Tonkin and Taylor, it could be an Opus, or it could be all the organisations that Stavros use. So it is quite a wide range and consistent how we normally do work as well, but ramped up a little bit to support these initiatives and help drive them through. Yep.
Thank you, Thomas. I wasn't fishing, I was just interested. Kia ora.
Yep.
Yes, and it is good for us to know, and the wider public as well, that when we need to, we are able to rely on external expert advice too. Moving on to Councillor Rokawatake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The global themes I found very interesting, Thomas, and I think the future trends, but one of the things that's quite obvious now, and it's coming from around the world and New Zealand too, the purchasing and buying habits of the public have definitely changed. And so that could probably have a significant impact on the jobs in the future for Rotorua. So that's something too I think we need to be aware of. And they say by May of next year we'll have a far greater awareness of the true impact in terms of job losses. But buying habits have definitely changed. People just going online. I mean, the courier companies have never been so busy. And they tell you that now, and the shops as well are trying to think, how can we still deliver services and provide retail experiences, but online? So that's going to have an impact.
Were there any further questions? There appear to be none. Well, thank you very much, Thomas, and I appreciate the update, not only on the micro, but the macro economics as well, so we can get a good glimpse of what's going on in the world, and it's great to see that people are still looking to invest here in Rotorua. We now move to page 13, the operational report for August through to September. I'll ask for a mover and a seconder that the operational report for August to September 2020 be received. Moved by Councillor Bentley, seconded by Councillor Wang. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye, carried. We go to page 14, which is Thomas Collet again, Business Support Group, and I invite you to overview your report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Yes, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. The on page 14, item 4.2.3, long-term plan, the word business, is there a word missing before or after that?
Sorry, I'm just looking it up, Councillor. Where was it again?
The sentence reads, the business performance team is working with the business to evaluate and quantify. What is the business being referred to?
us, RLC, as an entity.
Oh, okay, right.
We treat ourselves as a business.
That's a good idea. B, when will these proposed project costs be shared with elected members who have to make comparative value decisions? So I note down the bottom is the Investment Management Committee is going to work in a particular way. Will those proposed project costs be made available to us? Because I understand ultimately we're going to have to make decisions in the LTP context about the comparative value of proposed projects.
Yeah, so at the moment, the organisation is in full swing preparing its draft LTP, as you know. We've had a number of workshops with yourselves to understand what the priorities are going forward and the challenges. And we will be in a position shortly whereby we will be able to bring together for the first draft our infrastructure strategy, the program of works, and what sort of spending will need to be taken to support the initiatives that you've identified. Once we've done a few iterations of that, that will be brought to the elected members in the LTP forums at due course. At this stage, though, that's looking at, I think the schedule, and Una's not here, is at the end of October or early November, which they will be brought to you. With regards to the Investment Management Committee, it's something that we've established this year to help us be more focused on how we spend our money this year. So as we said at the start, when we built the annual plan, we needed to be able to respond and be adaptive. To do that is we need to have clear insight with regards to what is going on, both externally, but how we're going internally, and ensure that from an internal perspective, we can respond where it's appropriate. So the Investment Management Committee was established to help support that as a mechanism. So to understand what our current program of work is, where it's at, what we're committed to, what the opportunities or challenges are coming forward, and review that and see as to whether we need to adjust and adapt. And so far we haven't had to adjust and adapt, but if we were to, then obviously that would come through back to Council as well with regards to the outcomes of it.
Good. Supplementary, please. Thank you, Chair. The question then follows, has thought been given to including an expert elected representative on the Investment Management Committee?
No, I think the Investment Management Committee is an internal business delivery aspect, bearing in mind that elected members can at any time through these avenues provide us with guidance as to where the priorities sit. So we feel that from a operational perspective, this committee helps deliver and provide the direction. Obviously, from an elected member perspective, the LTP discussions, forums, and these committee meetings are the avenues for you to provide the guidance to us as to whether that's appropriate or not. And then that Investment Management Committee will take those recommendations on board and will adjust accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just two questions around procurement. Is there a change in the policy now where we're tightening up procurement for local buying, given we are restricting participation clause there?
We have strengthened it. So when we go out to procurement, and as part of that process, you look at how you're going to evaluate the tender proposals that come back. So Kerry Starling, our procurement lead, as a result, is where it is appropriate, and unfortunately for NZTA contracts it's not, because there's a different criteria. We have strengthened the localism requirement and therefore put a greater weighting against that. So in the scoring, therefore, that we are therefore preferring to use locals over others. And it is proving successful, but in some cases though, we are seeing that locals may still miss out because their prices are different or they don't have the expertise that we're required, etc., etc. But there is a greater focus on that. There also have been some instances where we actually made it a requirement for you to be local. So if you wish to participate in this tender process, you have to demonstrate that you are local, and so therefore have only ring-fenced it to locals. And so we're using both of those strategies at the moment to try and encourage as much work as possible to locals. However, it doesn't always work, and as we've seen some local businesses that have missed out as a result and been quite vocal about it.
Thank you. Just one further question, and it goes before the tender process, so that for us to ensure our climate change policy and our our wood first policy, a lot of it actually goes back to the specifications at the beginning. So is there a chance to look at that? Because obviously sometimes by the time it's gone to a tender process, if you specify steel rather than wood, there isn't an opportunity then for local businesses to participate in that procurement process.
It's a valid point, I guess, when the organisation is putting the requirements together with regards to the outcomes that we're looking for. We do obviously have that wood first policy, which takes effect, but there are instances obviously where that can't always take place. I think as a whole, when we're looking to package work up and how it can be delivered, we're obviously focused on the most cost-effective way of delivering the outcome that we want as a priority, and always woven through that is the sustainability question and the localism question. The question you're asking is, can that be strengthened? Always, and I guess I'll go back to the team and we'll reiterate our expectations around that front. But as I said, we have had a big approach this year with regards to, on the back of COVID, ensuring that we put as much work as possible to our local workforce, because that is our priority. So.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Worship, the Mayor.
I did just want to clarify too that we adopted a wood first policy which doesn't entitle planners or council to dictate that a building must be built in wood. We can only indicate a preference, and so developers choose, and we've seen some products built that I think, oh, what a pity they're not wood, to reflect what we want to see, but they've chosen another option because of cost, and that remains their choice. So until you've got that cost benefit of building in wood, we're not going to win this argument. That is our preference, and that's very clearly reflected in the wood first policy we adopted. But there has been some lost opportunities, and I bleed with you about that in some of our newest buildings.
Councillor Yates.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. Tēnā koe, Thomas. He rawe tēnei ripota. My question was actually around the weighting, so thank you for clarifying that. Can you give me any specifics, though, around what that weighting might look like for procurement?
It varies based on the type of work and the contract. So it could therefore be, as an example, 20% of the total score could be the localism factor, and it really does depend on the outcome. And then overlaying that as well as with regards to, we have that 5% requirement. So if a tenderer is within 5% of the first ranked, and the first ranked is not a local company, then we can actually go through our procurement practices, take the next one who is local, so long as it's within 5%. So we do have that flexibility as well, going through the process.
Thank you. Ms. Bray.
Kia ora, Thomas. For your Investment Management Committee, you've got here in your report that JP is the chair. Who are the other members?
So Gina Rangi, Jocelyn, Stavros and myself. Yeah. So JP leads it because obviously it's a strategically important committee with regards to ensuring we drive the vision and outcomes that you set us. Hence, JP as the group manager of strategy leads that committee. Yep.
Mr. Hurd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thomas, are we aware that on the 16th of September, Central Government announced through Minister Twyford a low-carbon procurement policy for all of government, which is surrogate language for Wood First? And if so, are we working with Central Government to help them and us collectively make that work, because it's really good news for Rotorua?
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate once again that Wood First is a priority for us, and at every opportunity we explore what those options are. As Her Worship pointed out, some things are outside of our control. Versus, and we've all seen, all those that ride in the forest have probably seen the wonderful building that's being built at Red Stag for the laminated processing plant, which again is made out of wood rather than steel. But I think the challenges for us is, if you look at our construction priorities ahead of us, the museum won't be able to be refurbished and strengthened with wood, and neither would the Performing Arts Centre, as an example. However, where appropriate, wood will obviously be used in those facilities, and going forward with regards to construction of new buildings, and that the open tender with regards to the visitor centre at Longmire was a classic example of it. Wood First was at the heart of that, and all the proposals that came back were supportive of all Wood First initiatives.
Well, thank you, Thomas. That concludes your section, but I do want to thank you for all your excellent comprehensive answers this morning. Thank you very much. We'll move to page 16. I invite Gina Rangi up from Manahautu Māori to overview her report.
Ko tātou, tēnei te miha tu kia tātou katoa I tēnei ata. As elected members know, the Te Amorangi team have really 3 kaupapa that we work on, which are outlined in my report. The first is professional development, and you will see in there reference to the Noho Marae program. We just finished one last week for new staff. There are 2 more for the end of the year. In terms of Te Reo Māori and tikanga support, we provide translation work. We run the program for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. And although this year that was hampered by the uncertainty around the levels, which meant that the Aronui Festival had to be cancelled, there was still, we were able to pull together a program both internal to council and externally as well, which is described in my report. And the third thing we do is technical advice across all teams. I'll take my report as read, but I did want to note that where I talk about the engagement with landowners at Rotuiti. So essentially what happens is we've built the wastewater treatment plant at Rotuiti. There is a network of pipes, of course, that need to be built across to connect homes to the plant. A number of those pipes have to cross Māori land. Not all of those blocks have up-to-date trustees, so there's a whole process that we have to go through around obtaining consent from the owners to build. To begin that process, we will be having hui a hapu, or hapu hui, beginning 2 next week on Saturday at Te Kura Kaupapa Māori, Orotiti, and then there's another on the Sunday. And then we will begin engagement with the 100 or so blocks of Māori landowners, many of which actually are held by maybe one owner or 2 or 3, which is usually siblings or spouses, but then also a fair few that have got hundreds of owners, so it's quite a process. We wanted to talk a little bit this morning about some of the names that you'll see in the Whakareo forest, so I've asked Kingi to come along today and give an explanation.
Tēnā tātou, I roto I te āhuatanga o te wā. I'm here, as we see, with my pepper in front of me. Ka pai. So there are people come to Rotorua and they see names that they can see all over the world. And Rotorua has stories written in the names of the various places that surround and punctuate our home area. So we're looking at the Ti Tokorangi and the Whakarewarewa forest. So firstly, you will see that the branding is known as the Moerangi, Moerangi, Moerangi is the wife of Ngongotaha. There is a story that when Moirangi is wearing her hat and when Ngongo Taha is wearing his hat, you need to put on a raincoat. That's the kōrero. And when we bring these kōrero, these names out, we also bring the messages and the kōrero out as well. So that is Moirangi. Moirangi is a maunga. Moirangi is a mountain in the Whakareorewa forest, and it is a mountain of huge significance and aroha to the people of Ngāti Whakaue and the people of Tūhourangi. If you listen to one of our famous Ngāti Whakaue pātere, one of our Ngāti Whakaue pātere, we have that name Moerangi, and kia piki tia ngā pinakitanga ki Moerangi kia māra ma te titiro ki ngā matawhaonga o roto kākahi ka tūhera mai. The second one is Titokorangi, and that is in the Redwood area. Known as Tokorangi, the T part was taken off. Tokorangi or Titokorangi pā in the Redwoods area belonged to a tupuna by the name of Tangaroa Mihi. Tangaroa Mihi was on the Te Arawa canoe and he travelled inland from Maketu. So when we bring back that kōrero of Titokorangi, we bring back the kōrero of Tangaroa Mihi and all of his kōrero. We also see Tangaroa Mihi is also one of the mountain biking tracks in the forest. Okay, let me see. The next one is Te Pūtake o Tawa. What we lovingly call the Forest Hub 2 is now being called Te Pūtake o Tawa. Tawa is one of the mountains. Tawa is one of the maunga. Just as you get into the Forest Hub 2, you look to the left and you'll see Tawa. Tawa was the place, of course, you call it Tawa. That's where the tawa berries were collected by the haukainga, by the mana whenua. Te pūtake is the base or the origin. So when people come in, they are coming to the base of tawa. That's why it's called Te Pūtake o Tawa. Secondly, we have the Whakarewa Forest Loop. As far as I can remember, it's always been called the Whakarewa Forest. So this is something that we all know. So the mana whenua, the haukainga of both forests, chose to call it the Whakarewa Forest Loop. When we bring back the names, we bring back the stories and they live. And it contributes to what we call the Rotorua story. Koia ngā kōrero, I think that's what I've been sent. Yeah, tēnā koutou.
Oreira, if there are any questions, tēnei te wā, this is the time.
Councillor Maxwell. Councillor Maxwell, put on your mic.
Aloha mai. Ka pai? Aloha mai. Through you, Gina and Kingi, I commend all of Council's efforts during Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. Tino Ātāhua. And so please, and through you, Mr. CEO, if you would let all of staff know their efforts are much appreciated. Look forward to the day when it's 52 weeks of the year, when it is Māori Language Year. Kia ora. But I wanted to really express the appreciation. And in actual fact, I'm finding a lot of staff now very comfortable, very comfortable, and it's encouraging. But that's what I wanted to express and pass on. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Gina, Titokorangi, I understand that name is also being gifted to Longmile Drive, so it'll be known in future as Titokorangi Drive.
Correct. Thank you.
Councillor Wang.
Kia ora, Madam Chair. Thank you, Gina and Kingi. I would also like to tautoko Councillor Maxwell's comments on Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. I've heard some great things around our tamariki, around the district, and how they've really enjoyed learning more about it and celebrating the Māori culture. My question was around the climate action plan. Has Manahautu Māori been involved with Te Urunga or Kia, the Te Arawa Climate Change Working Group?
That's been led and driven by Te Arawa. So we've had regular updates as council from Nikki Douglas and her team, but it's more for us to look at and respond to rather than try to influence the contents of that plan. But certainly we have received the plan from Nikki, and we're looking at dates to bring her team in to talk to ours around practical ways we can be aligned.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Nei rā te mihi ki a kōrua tahi, o tira ki te ope ki tā koutou nā ohu e mahi ana I wēnei o ngā kaupapa. Ko tāku, nā te mea kei wainga I tēnei wahanga o mahuru tonu, kei te mahuru tonu, ko o turu o mahuru tēnei rangi. So in Māoridom, we work from a maramataka with a moon phase and the appropriate season. So today is actually o turu, the marama, and we are still within mahuru, which is what some might call our month, but e hara ko tira, ko te wahanga o te tau. I attended the kurereo I tēnei wiki, and one of the things that was raised, and I thought this is probably appropriate to raise it here whilst we're naming things, 13th of January is a significant day, ko tira te rā I tau mai te wako o te arawa, ki make tū. And wondering whether or not it might be a consideration that might be a significant day for us to uphold here in Te Arawa, here in Rotorua, and especially here at Council, perhaps a Te Arawa Day on the cards. Engari, ka waihono ho tērā ka koro ki kora, ki wainga I tēnei ahuatanga o mahuru. Kia ora rā koutou, he mihi noi ho tēnei kia koutou.
Kia ora, Your Worship the Mayor.
Kia ora, and congratulations on Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori. It was a wonderful week, and we could hear the reo in town, which is when we know we're getting success. But I also want to congratulate you on the naming of the Hemo sculpture, Te Ahi Tūpua. When you told us the story, and our comms told the story to the community, suddenly that work of public art became hugely significant because it was one of our stories. So I think we need to keep repeating that story. I look forward to the opening and the public response, and I don't usually quote social media, but I had 45,000 hits on social media, which is the biggest I've ever had on any topic since I've been the mayor of this town, and hugely positive and international reach. So I think the telling of that story, which we'll repeat at the opening ad nauseum, so that we tell our story here in Rotorua, that made a work of art become significant because it's part of our storytelling. So thank you, and thank you to the team that put that communication out there. It was very, very significant, picked up by so many people who now see it as so much more than what they thought it was. So well done at that significant time.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Kia ora, thank you. An issue that was identified, first, kia ora Gina, Pihia Kingi, good to see you both. The thing that jumped up last week during the hearings for PC2 or Pukehangi Heights was access by mana whenua to Pukehangi Pā, which is also an urupa. I wonder to what extent Te Amorangi can find time to advance that agenda very gently. Kia ora.
Kia ora. So just by way of background for elected members or the public who don't know the background to that, Pukehangi Pā is a wāhi tupuna. It's a very important ancestral site. It was set aside as a Māori reservation in the late 1880s, but over time it became landlocked, and so it's surrounded by farmland, a parcel of farmland on three sides and quite difficult terrain. And then between the roadway and the par side is a block of private land. That land was subdivided in the early 2000s. That's the Parkland subdivision. At the time of the subdivision, there was a requirement, a condition in the resource consent, that pedestrian access be provided to the par. Over time, that has become difficult, and there's been disagreement about whether practical access has been given. So, for example, the fencing, access to the quay because it is a gated community. There's plantings along the fence line that make it a little difficult, particularly for koike to access the park. It is, however, private land, and it's outside the scope of the plan change itself. So there's not really anything that can be done within the plan change context, but I think council does have a leadership role within our community and are able to talk to people, and that's really what our role has been. And I want to acknowledge the planning team that have really been very active and have consistently come to my team to seek advice and support to try and broker an agreement between the private landowners and Ngāti Kiaro, Ngāti Tuara, who are the iwi, the hapu, who are the kaitiaki, as well as the owners of the par site itself. There's a limit in what we can do because it is a question of influence and relationships, but certainly it's something that our staff, not just my team but also the planning team, are actively trying to support an agreed outcome on, as well as looking at what can be done within the context of the RMA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And last question to Mr. Waru.
Tēnā anō koe te chairman, hoi anō tēnā tātou, tēnā kōrua. Kai te rere tonu ngā mihi pāna ki te wiki o te reo Māori, engari kai te mōhio kei rā kōrua ki tōku nā whakaaro, ko te wiki o te reo Māori ia wiki. Nā reira, kai te tautoko au i ngā mihi, kua mihia. Me te mea hoki, ki ngi ka karawe te rongo atu, kai te whakahokia mai e ni ingoa. E mea kua whai hā anō ngā ingoa ni, kua whai oranga. So, kai te tino hari taku ngāka. I'm very happy about that. I'm always happy about that when our old names come back. And with that, ngā kōrero. Nā te mea ātāhua i rā kōrero. So, thank you very much. Hoi anō, taku pātai. Firstly, Kauai Cemetery. Can you please clarify for me what this appointed council and Ngāti Whakauē appoint half the trustees each is? Is that what you're saying? That's not my taku mōhio about that.
To the committee, to the committee that oversees the management. So the land was gifted by Ngāti.
The management.
Yes. By Ngāti Whakauē, but the management sits between Whakauē and the council, so
Kawa.
At an operational level. The meetings are held twice a year?
Twice a year.
Twice a year. And it's really to ensure that our staff have the ability to really work under the shared direction of Whakauē and the council. Actually, I think
because Kingi's on there, so that's why.
Are you still a trustee? Kingi is still a trustee. And there's a wide range of issues that come up at those meetings around capital expenditure, but also around the way that we manage on a day-to-day basis.
Kai, just a part I added to that one. We've had some feedback from a few whānau, as we always do now, Kingi. And they were having a bit of a go about the quality of the upkeep in terms of the weed eating, the weed killer, how they tidy up, ngā berms, ngā takotoranga. Has that ever been brought to your attention? If not, what's the right way to go about it?
So in terms of, we receive a wide range of feedback, both positive and negative. I think there is, and actually I would say that the Ngāti Whakauē trustees themselves are probably the most staunch in terms of the expectations of proper care and upkeep. if there is anything of a detailed nature, then you're more than welcome to either raise it with myself or with Rob Keithley for us to attend to. There's, I think Rob's here. Do you want to add anything to that, Rob? Yeah. You don't look like you do.
Kia ora, through you, Madam Chair. The cemetery is administered by the Trust Board, and the twice a yearly meeting, we do go through operational reports around the maintenance standards and audited performance against contracts, as well as just working on anecdotal feedback and things like that. So it's got quite a complicated and robust feedback loop that we use, and so we're always working on trying to identify areas where things need to be improved and then improve those.
Kia ora, was just a question I tai mai ki te tatau o te arawa that I obliged to ask. Wena noa, kia ora.
If I may, Madam Chair, māku tērā kaupapa whai atu. Basically, I just said I'll follow that up. I know a trustee, so kapai.
Thank you. And finally, Your Worship, the Mayor.
Yes, just an answer to Mr Waru's question there. Councillor Mercia Yates has just been appointed. She's the first wahine of Whakaui to be appointed to that committee. And all councillors and community board members are welcome to attend those meetings. Welcome. Councillor Maxwell comes, Councillor Donaldson comes. It's a great learning. And the feedback mechanism is through those on the board who are very active at putting that part on the table.
Finally, Councillor Maxwell.
Madam Chair, if you would indulge me, I just want to respond to that kōrero. Hera te mea kino. Just want to say, thank you, Your Worship. Kai te mara mai tērā. The only reason I asked that because the way I read it, just to my knowledge, it was only ko tahi anake te mea no te kauni hera I runga I te puari. But there was a different committee. That's the only reason why it was asked. Kia ora.
Ka pai tō pātahia I rā mutu. I think I need to say we only met recently, only 2 weeks ago. I think it was the 2nd of September. In actual fact, being one of the trustees there, most of the committee made up of Whakaue and some of us councillors actually he prays on the work that's been done there at Kauai in recent times, and a couple of little issues come up which gets addressed straight away, like now with all the new work that's happened, like the new fittings for the water, trying to clean some of the tombstones and various things, and that changed. Some of them can't use it, so it gets addressed. But there was praise for the work that's been done by our Kauai staff. Kia ora, I thought I need to mention.
Thank you. Tēnei te mihi kia korua mo tō kōrero I tēnei rā. Tēnā hari ko te ngākau. I'm very happy to hear the stories behind some of our significant place names, so thank you very much. We now move to page 18. I invite JP up to talk about the strategy group report. Over to you, JP.
Morena, everyone. Through you, Madam Chair, just take my report as read. The one thing I would add, and it's been raised this morning already, was references to the Climate Action Plan. So our consultation period closes on the 16th of October. So I'm sure that you're aware of people out there in our community who may have an interest in this plan and some of the actions being proposed. So if you would like, or you would like anyone to come and speak to any groups, or if you can advise anyone who may want to have a face-to-face meeting, the staff are very keen to go and talk to any groups about the plan. and just talk them through what are the actions being proposed, where have they come from, and where have the targets really focused in on as well. So I'm very, very keen to reach out to anyone who's still considering making a submission or wants some additional information. So I'll just throw that back to you all and through your networks. So apart from that, happy to answer off any other questions on the report.
Thank you, JP. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Thank you, JP, and thanks for mentioning the Climate Action Plan. And my question is, are the rural sector being consulted? Are they having separate workshops? I've been subjected to some questions about what we're telling farmers to do, which is far from the point, and when I've read the action plan. So I think there does need to be some work around the rural sector. Mrs. Trumper usually picks that up, but we can't leave it dangling there. I wondered if Bryce could give some input there.
Actually, I think Councillor Wang could probably answer that, and if Mr. Hurd wants to add any
Your
point.
Worship, and thank you through the Chair. Yep, I'd like to just confirm that we have been talking with the rural sector about it, and that was one of the things that I really wanted to do. No finger pointing, to actually work together with this for the strategy. So a few weeks ago, I, alongside the Rural Community Board, Ms. Trumper organised it with Nikki and Federated Farmers so that we could meet together and talk about it. The outcome of that meeting was really, really good, and again, there was no finger pointing, and we realised that that we did need to work together for this. For the approach to climate change, and that they did, recognise that there is always a better way to do things, and I guess, so the outcome of that was really good.
Thank you, Councillor Wang, and just for those who aren't aware, Councillor Wang is our council rep on the Rural Community Board, and I'll just ask Mr. Hurd if he wants to make any further comments. Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had a really robust debate around that. One of the things that comes out of it is that under the current conventions, we're allowed to sequester carbon and measure it internationally. That's sequestered by tree growth. What we're not allowed to do under the international protocols is retain the carbon after the tree is felled. So immediately the soil goes into the tree to fell it, all that carbon's deemed sequestered. Whereas, in fact, over half it stays in the tree for another 25 to 100 years because it's all around us in the wood. 60% of the wood you see around is by weight is stored carbon. And if we were able to include that solid wood in our Rotorua figures, we would be carbon neutral now as a region. And agricultural share of the carbon sequestration would go from 67% to 17 or 15%. And that's a gross injustice against the agricultural sector. And I think we, Rotorua, should lead a debate around that, as we did from Rotorua when we originally got sequestered carbon from trees included in the Geneva Convention on Climate Change. Rotorua led that, and we got it in there. We can also get solid wood.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd. Very valuable perspective and insight from our Rural Community Board member. We move to Councillor McPherson.
Yes, through you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that. It's a dimension I hadn't thought of. And it's not part of the public debate at all, nationally or indeed internationally. I'd like to see that one go further. With regard, if I might go back to your report, and thank you for it, JP, the very first report's about the strategic framework for homes and thriving communities. I've been looking at that and looking at the national policy context and the changes over the years, and I do have some concerns. And I know this is outside the policy process, but where do I now lodge those concerns, those worries I've got about this framework? Because I think in some aspects it has some limitations. So my question through you, Chair, is how can I contribute? For example, the project management officer is going to take over the planning in this area, and I wonder if that's an appropriate place for me to send my concerns. Thank you.
I think we'll take that as noted, if you're okay, and we'll get back to you on that one.
Thank you very much. Kia ora.
Were there any further questions? There appear to be none. Oh, sorry. Yes, Your Worship.
Oh, look, the Child Equity Project. I would love to see other councillors, not to swamp the school, but to go and to look at the difference that you can make in partnership with education and parents on child equity. It's a stunning example of when you work together in partnership, opening up opportunities that council has with our facilities and our expertise of what can be done. Might be a lovely visit at some stage. The principal's getting quite bogged down with enthusiastic visitors, but at some stage when it fits in, I find it the most graphic example of where we can make a difference for our children in our district if we take that through into our other locality plans and schools. That will make a difference for our children and families. So I'd love a visit organised at some stage for those that are interested, because we often look and think, are we making a difference to the metrics that we see going down? And Thomas pointed out, you know, we worry about unemployment, the effect. When you can build a resilient school with its parents and all the support systems, it makes a difference to those children. And I think our approach needs to be strengthened in our locality approach and the housing strategy. So where is it going next, Thomas? JP?
And I think this is some of the things that Jill and the team are doing is they're really making sure we get the most of the learnings that we've done with the Sunset primary example, and again even the carry-on effects there of the drain actually on the leadership of the school around them being an exemplar now for us. So I'll certainly talk to Jill because I think there is some real value in a visit, and it might be really beneficial. So we'll try and organise that with the principal at some stage. But I think you've touched on a really important point there, which there is a huge amount of commitment from our board of trustees and from the senior leadership in a school to support any efforts into this child equity program. So there is a significant commitment that needs to be supported there from the school itself. And so again, that's an important learning within the school systems across the district as well, to see the value of that commitment that needs to be made. So again, that's now been identified with those next tranche of schools that are going to make that commitment to the time and effort. But I think you've also raised a really critical point that as we move to more of a locality focus, the next iteration may be more specific to those areas that we're trying to do the most significant work in. So that will be the next step as well. So, but your suggestion of a visit is a very good one, so I'll get that organised.
Thank you. And final question to Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP. And sorry, just a few last questions or comments on the climate action plan. One idea that was brought to me the other day by one of the children that attend one of the local schools was actually if council would be able to visit the local schools or kura and present to them the action plan, or invite them to council to do a group session about it. There's an amazing amount of people that amazing amount of school kids that are really interested in this, and they've applauded this as well. The other question that I had was, the other comment that I had was about the Ngātaha public meeting that we had last week as well. And again, that one, there was a massive turnout. Miss Trumper and I attended that meeting, and the turnout there was just amazing. We probably should have booked the Ngātaha Hall instead of having it at the bowling club. But again, it's a lot of feedback from that as well. So it's really good to see the work being done in that space. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you very much, JP. We now invite Jocelyn Mikaere. Rob Ketley, thank you very much. I welcome you. We are on the operations group on page 20.
Kia
Kia ora tātou. Jocelyn's apologies, she's away at the moment, so we'll take the report as read. It starts with the major projects, which are mainly in myself and Stuart's area, but we've got the team here to answer any questions. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, Stuart. Were there any questions on the Operation Group report? From page 20 to page 28. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. No, a very good report outlining all the things, good information for us to know. I just have one. I don't know if it's able to be answered, Brownie, but if all the reports on the various projects we got, the thing that sticks out to me is always the asbestos, always holding us up or costing so much. Do you have a ballpark figure of how much has cost us the museums, the Harold Morrison Centre, Soundshell?
Lord.
Just even a guess out of there. Eh? Yeah, too much. Yeah. Thank you, Brandon.
Fantastic question. Thank you. I think it's it's an artifact of the era of the buildings that we're working on. It was a material that was commonly used from a very long time ago, and especially in a lot of the buildings now that we're working on that are 50, 60 sort of years old, we're just finding it. And, the Soundshell was a classic.
Yeah.
We found it at the Aquatic Centre. It's just one of those things that we're now going through that replacement period, and it's something that we have to deal with. And a lot of, I suppose, the work that we're doing on some of these buildings, the as-builts from the time don't have a lot of detail, and so it is a discovery. I mean, it's a contingency that we've learned to put into our programs to make sure that we are aware that it's likely to be found, and so we just manage that as best we can. And certainly Stuart's having some more interesting issues with it too recently now with his projects.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. It is a process of discovery. In many of the places we're finding the current challenges, for instance, at Te Wharetonga o Te Arawa, is asbestos in the ground. So on our initial testing, it was in the upper layer, and we removed that, and then as we've dug down, we found it in subsequent lower levels. It's even more challenging because we need to ventilate the area down in the basement because of heat and H2S. And as we're removing the very fine silica particles down there, that fires the asbestos into the air. And so we've got ongoing monitoring, cleaning, retesting, and that process is still ongoing. I don't have a definitive time in terms of how long it will take. It will take as long as it takes to clean it. But we do have an advantage that we've discovered this pre-construction, so we're not standing down construction, which we would have had to done if we discovered it during construction. So we are doing as much testing as we possibly can pre-start.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. The Lakefront Development Report, 7.1.6 on page 22. In June 2019, Council invited pitches for the development of iconic buildings in this development. What were the outcomes of those invitations for pitches, and where is that part of the project now? Thank you.
Would you like to? I
might just pass that on to JP.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe if you could ask the question one more time.
In June 2019, Council invited pitches for the development of iconic buildings in the area where the Soundshell was. That invitation for pitches, I assume, led to a process of hearing pitches and advancing the process of planning the development of what were referred to as iconic buildings. What were the outcomes of that pitch process and what followed? Because it's not mentioned in this report at all. Thank you.
Councillors will remember that one of the things that we identified in the lakefront development planning process, so that led to us putting together the Crown infrastructure, the PGF application for the 40 million for the lakefront development, was to identify a commercial investment building footprint within the lakefront. So the council is referring to that request for proposals or expressions of interest to invest in a building development. So that process was completed and a partner was identified to consider an investment in a lakefront building. Again, some of the things that have occurred over the last few years has been the alignment of the leases of the current lakefront operators so that they had the option of moving into a newly developed commercial investment building. So at this point, we were working with that investor up until obviously the COVID-19 issues have arisen, and we've now gone back to that investor to still gauge their interest in pursuing the development of a building further. At this stage, they are interested, but they are concerned around the timing and the risks. So we've taken it on ourselves to say, look, we need to identify at this stage the actual footprint area. So we've progressed some initial locational designs so that the rest of the 40 million of infrastructural work and the development of the reserve area can continue with a view of that building still progressing with time. So again, at this stage, we're in conversations with that investor, and we're proposing probably to work with them collaboratively just to see where we're going with potential tenants for that lakefront development. So that's the process underway at this stage. So I will be able to report back to you in the next couple of months as to what those steps are in that timing, and that will, however, be in a confidential session.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yates, followed by Councillor Donaldson.
Tēnā koe, and thank you through you, Madam Chair. O tira kia korua. A couple of things I want to comment on, and then I've got one final question. First of all, congratulations on the hashtag We Make Events last night. It was fantastic to see the city lit up, and other entities around Rotorua celebrating in that and painting the town red. So nei rā te mihi kia koutou. Wonderful also to see the Sir Howard Morrison Performing Arts Centre finally underway, and apologies I couldn't make the karakia, I had to work that morning, but it's really neat to see action happening there. The third part was around the park upgrade. I drove past that yesterday afternoon, so to see that open for the school holidays, congratulations to have a small part of that open, and look forward to seeing the rest of that in the new year. Now the question I do have, looking at a number of things, and it actually came to my attention when JP was talking, but it was around the Ngāti Whakaue bus and whether or not we could look at potential partnerships to also include places like Te Puia as being pātaka kōrero, as being parts of our wider education outside the classroom, and whether or not that might be an opportunity for potentially the museum or the library to look at providing more stories, utilising some of our local businesses that are rich in story, and we saw that just with the stories Kingi told us about names. So he whakaaro noiho tira to include Te Puia, potentially Waimangu, with the utilisation of a bus, because bus costs often impede children accessing some of these places. So he whakaaro noiho, and whether or not that might be a possibility.
Through the chair, yes, the Ngāti Whakaue Education Endowment Trust supports the museum. It does bring schools into the museum and the library, and historically, prior to closure, we were including kids going out to the buried village as well. We've had discussions with Te Puia, and probably in the current environment, they're probably most likely to be focused around locals, and we're certainly going to have that discussion with Tim.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Rob, I'm not sure if you're able to answer this. Mine's also around the lakefront. And with the closure of Memorial Drive a couple of days ago for the plaza work, Do we know what the status of the Memorial Plaza will be come Anzac Day next year, assuming we're able to have a more normal Anzac celebration?
The plan is that a vast majority of that work will be done by Christmas. So we're hoping at either for Christmas or very early after, it will be available for pedestrian access through a lot of it. And then the actual plaza should be completed before Anzac Day. I think they're talking about March. So we should be able to fit in that timeline. So that will be there for the new start of the Anzac Day service.
Well, thank you very much, Rob and Stuart. Much appreciated. We now have our final group manager report. I invite Stavros Michael up. We are on page 29 for the report on infrastructure group.
Kia ora tātou katoa. Through you, Madam Chair, I will leave the report, take the report as read, and happy to take any questions. I'll just only note 2 or 3 items. I think that elected members may be interested to be updated on. One is that we continue to work with our partner NZTA in terms of ongoing works to the east and the west of the district. As Councillor Wang said last week, on the 23rd of September, we had a community meeting in Nongotaha where the ongoing works around the Nongotaha roundabouts, the stormwater management for the Nongotaha stream, and also the proposal for the council to consider improvement options through the Nongotaha village were discussed with the public. It was a good turnover by the community there, and we had a good, robust discussion with many individuals, which I think will help in further inform the actions and activities in that particular area. The second item to note is that we, as an infrastructure group, and as my colleague Thomas said earlier, we are progressing and just about finalized our infrastructure strategy for the 21-31 period, which actually is a 30-year period for us. But nevertheless, consistent with the major objectives of the organisation, we have identified what are the operational renewal and capital interventions needs for the next significant number of years to give effect to our major strategies for housing and community well-being. And obviously, those issues will be brought in front of the Council as part and parcel of your LTP considerations. And the third item on the agenda, which also is aligned with future LTPs, just to note that we have started participating into a regional steering group where we consider the effects or the potential options arising from the government's stated intentions of the Three Waters reform. And a group of about 10 regional TLAs got together with a consulting group that will commence a process of gathering the information, analysing the various infrastructure strategies and condition of asset management plans, current needs and future projections for these areas and demands, with a view over the next few months, probably by the April or May next year, some preliminary indications will be formed as to what opportunities are there for further collaboration in the region, consistent with the government's Three Waters reforms. This is a significant exercise, and we are talking to major parties, not just in our region, but in other regions like Hawke's Bay and the Wellington area, and further to the Western Taranaki area, and obviously that would be of major interest to this organisation and any other TLAs. Thank you. Take any questions.
Thank you, Stavros. Mr. Hirsch?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stavros, I'm looking at bullet point 3 on page 28, and my question is around Amaha Street. The question is that, has any consideration been given to long-term proofing of Amaha Street crossing with the proposed Tutanakai Street spine that was so well articulated by Greg Brown's focus group during COVID. Having Tutanakai Street as a pedestrian spine with all the beautiful architecture and Māori design, etc., up and down Tutanakai Street, so it became an experience, and separating the traffic at Amahau Street so that the one goes over the other. There's a bridge of some kind there. Either the traffic goes over or the pedestrians go over. Has any thought been given to that?
Thank you, Bryce. Look, the connection of Tutanakai Street to Rotorua Central is a primary consideration because obviously you have in mind continuously the future functionality of the CBD and the possible options of either partial or full pedestrianisation to Tutanakai Street all the way from Rotorua Central to the lakefront. So that's quite important. The current design that's in the process of being funded for tendering early next year by NZTA anticipates a significant sort of definition of that corridor, which is going to be quite similar to what we have in the Manawa area, the old, city focus, which is be consistent with that kind of design to give a clear definition as to a preference for pedestrian safe corridor through there. I appreciate that a lot of people talk about flyovers and underpasses and so on. And the reality is that from engineering perspective, if money was not a concern, obviously there are lots of solutions to that. However, a significant underpass or flyover there would cost a lot of money, far more money than actually what the government has identified for that, and maybe at some point in the future. So, that's been considered, but it's not part and parcel of design at this point in time.
Thank you for your ambitious question. Your Worship, the Mayor?
Yes, and this is an issue that we ask every year, really, to you, Stavros, but we were at the Miss Rotorua event on Saturday night, and they're very proud of collecting 5.5 tonnes with Council's help from Mount Nongataha. But several of the contestants who actually worked there were deeply shocked that it seemed to be largely people that go up there to park up and drink and then chuck their drink out. Is there any way we can deal with that? I know fly tipping is a perpetual issue for us and costs, and constantly we're trying to address it, but this seemed quite specific about trysting spots and drinking. I don't know where they are.
I don't know either, Your Worship. But the illegal and irresponsible behaviour by some individuals in the community is still there. I suspect it will continue to be with us in the future. We had a recent example where we worked with the Upper Nongataha Valley, the Paradise Road community. We identified some areas that were they were used as a stopping place for drinking and dumping illegal litter. We isolated them and put some large rocks, to stop it. We put some signages on the edging of the local community. Within 2 weeks, people went and smashed the signs, dump rubbish over it, and we'll continue to do that. We'll continue to work with local communities and events and monitoring and do the best we can. However, I think sort of an expectation that we will somehow eliminate that behavior by some few individuals, I think probably it will be a mountain too high to promise at this point in time. We'll continue to work on that.
Thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you, Stavros, I want to thank you for this report, but also could I ask you to carry thanks back to some of your colleagues, Eric Court and Paula Meredith, that's right. They've met 3 times now with about 15 locals to hammer around and talk about flooding problems being experienced by one particular area. Those processes have really generated a strong sense of engagement by the local people, and it's very much appreciated. So if you could pass that back to your colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, followed by Mr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stavros, just reading through the report on refuse and recycling, page 34, and I was at a presentation last night on the use of plastics or the recycling plastics into bio-certified fence posts and garden raised beds. And they use the soft plastics as which we're currently sending to landfill. So just my general question is, given Her Worship's earlier question about fly tipping, when are we due to have a review of our curbside service in terms of capacity for refuse collection? Are the bins big enough to take everything that people would chuck elsewhere, for example? And recycling, how long's that contract got to run? When do we have a good look at what the options are for future recycling?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Donaldson. I think the first opportunity you're going to have with regards to options for further waste minimisation aids during the LTP. As you recall, we have a waste management strategy, which basically is akin to our infrastructure strategy that's been agreed back in 2017 or 18, I think, and that's got a 6-year horizon. One of the objectives or targets of that was to consider further waste diversion of organic material from the wheelie bins, the waste bins. We've done some work onto that. I will come back to you during the LTP. Financially, there are obviously it's not a break even or not even sort of cost recovery exercise, but you may want to consider it in a different context in terms of ongoing waste minimization options. Second element is that, probably as you are aware, about a couple of months ago, the government announced that $134 million investment to consider local opportunities for management of plastic byproducts in the absence of international markets. And the industry at the moment is looking into developing options for managing those soft plastics, including perhaps use for agricultural purposes. And the third question is to how long is our contract? Our contract is for 15 years, we know a year and 5. We've got another 10 years in that contract. However, the contract is flexible enough to allow modifications to that if we so wish. So I think sort of as a matter of practice, probably the primary consideration at the moment is that the average waste bin, the red lid, the 140 litres, contains, according to our assessment, somewhere in the region of 45% of organic material that potentially could be placed in a different bin and used for composting and so on, which creates more capacity for people. But I think that's for your consideration, but because there will be some cost implications for that. It's not a cost, it's not a break-even scenario, and you have to consider in the LTP.
Just a supplementary question and perhaps a bit of a commentary. So there seem to be a lot of initiatives, and Councillor Wang and Phil and Mrs. Trumper, we attended recently an eco-gas plant at Rotorua, which is taking organic waste and converting that to compost and gas. And then this initiative that was a subject of a meeting last night also raised the question of future mining of landfills to recover plastics for use in this process. So how viable is that for us, and are we open to that sort of approach from the private sector to engage in mining of our capped landfill?
You're quite right, Deputy Mayor Donaldson. There are, I think that initiative of the government started with $134 million. It started stimulating the local industry to identify options. And what you're basically outlining at the moment is just as an early response by the industry in that respect. I think from our perspective, in terms of mining old landfills, and I don't think will be unique into that, is that if any TLA has a liability in the form of all landfills, because every old landfill is a liability, we manage in different ways, but remains a liability. If proposals come forward which identify positive or productive ways to manage the liability and convert it into an asset, then of course must be open to that. And it's always going to be the benefit cost, environmental benefit assessment to be done, but the response in principle is that of course we should consider it.
Thank you. And final question to Mr. Waru.
Wouldn't be a hui if I didn't get to ask Stavros a question. Nā reira gai te mihi atu. Kia ora, Stavros. Anui te mihi kia koe. Just a couple of questions, actually. So the first one is to refer to the public transport heading there with the buses, the bus shelter, sorry. It says report going to council in August. Is that, have we missed the boat there or something? Or was it just a typo?
I think, no, I think it must be a typo because the report came to council with the bus shelters, and the recommendation is obviously to be considered by the LTP process. So it's it's a typo.
Kate Pai, you had me going there for a little while. Also, to do with the landfill, the Leachit Lake. So you address what happened, but I'm more interested in what the effect of it is, if you are able to provide some kind of korero about that.
No, I think the report we're making for the landfill is that I think sort of we have a systematic process of proactive inspections and routine maintenance up there too, and as part and parcel of our resource consent obligations is actually to report any incidents where a part of the old network indicates leaks and so on. We had an incident in recent times that it was part and parcel of this report where those proactive inspections identified a joint dislocation that released some of the polluted stormwater and leachate onto the land. It did not escape the landfill, it stayed inside the land of the landfill, but I think we're obliged to report it to the regulatory authorities, the regional council, and or together with the mitigating actions we are taking onto that.
Thank you very much, Stavros. That's good. Last question, Madam Chair. The NDA. So, what actions are in place to reduce the need to source more nitrogen discharge allowance? I think it's
That is becoming a bit of a complex exercise as part and parcel of PC10, with the council, because as we're converting more and more greenfield areas into housing areas, obviously there's a need to credit and reconcile the conversion of nutrients, or I suppose the diversion of nutrients towards our wastewater system. And as elected members would know that we have some upper limits into how much nitrogen phosphorus we can discharge into the lake by agreement with regional council, the MFE and the Rotorua Lakes community and the trust. And as you progress through those various charges, obviously there are a number of considerations where we are getting credits, which allows us to compensate the conversion of greenfield development into housing areas, which eventually, in over a period of time, we will see our nutrient limits go from 30 tons a year to about 34 or 35 tons a year. However, as land development progresses and we have more and more housing, at some point in time we need to consider as to whether other options are there in the form of buying pastoral land and using that credibility to rebalance it.
Yes, kia ora, Stavros. That's the reason I'm asked actually is because it looks good for now, but going forward, is it really a sustainable way to keep doing it, or are we thinking of some other way? So that's all I wanted to do. Put it on the table. Nā reira. Tino pai o whakautu. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just to reinforce the point is that the collective wisdom of all the parties identified what is the maximum desirable nutrient load into Lake Rotorua. And it's been set. It's about 450 tons of, of nutrients. Each component of the activities contributes a certain level to that. That 450 tons is immovable. It needs to be done because what they call is, TLI for the lake. But if we convert land use to different activities, it needs to be a reallocation of those, limits within the ceiling of 450.
Thank you very much. Final question from Councillor Donaldson.
No, thank you, Madam Chair. It was just to ask Stavros just more on that same corridor. I think it's good to get it on the table, as Mr. Waru says, is that the benchmark for the discharge allowance from the wastewater treatment plant, which is roughly 5% of the nutrients entering the lake, was set in 2003-04. And since then, Council has reticulated many communities, thus reducing the discharge to groundwater from septic tanks. And that is now coming to the wastewater treatment plant. So we're still, even though that reticulation has taken place, there must be some offset benefit to our consent conditions to compensate for, I guess, that extra load.
Quite right. And I think that's the work. That's the mahi we do with with the regulatory authorities and our partners to make sure that our ability or the allowance to have nutrients through our wastewater treatments, it's compensated appropriately depending on the land development opportunities you have.
Thank you very much. We'll conclude it there and take a short break for 15 minutes before we return for the CCO updates. Thank you very much. We'll return at 11:30. that the report operational updates for Council from Infracore Limited, Rotorua Airport Limited and Rotorua Economic Development Limited be received. Moved by Councillor Kaifang, seconded by Mr Waru. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. We go to Matt Scott. Welcome, Matt. And Matt will give us an update on Infracore Limited on page 37.
Thank you very much, Tēnā koutou. I will take the report as read and take questions at the end. But we do have a short presentation, which is really focusing on the positives, not just from the last quarter, but also the last financial year since I've been in the CE role for Infracore, and in particular looking at Infracore as a delivery agent for delivering social outcomes as well as the services, the core business that we deliver, I suppose. So there we go. So just looking, understanding the role that Infracore plays in the Rotorua community and the relationships that have been developed over the last 12 months in order to get to a place where we can successfully deliver those outcomes. We've made good relationships and forged some strong friendships even within not just the iwi and Trust, but Ministry of Social Development, Corrections Department, and we've also had the golden opportunity to demonstrate our strengths of being able to deliver a redeployment program that has been created by the unfortunate event of COVID-19 with a positive outcome of being able to demonstrate the ability, I guess, for Infracore to be able to mobilise a workforce in a very short period of time and to meet all of the milestones and outcomes that were set successfully. Now, if you look at Infracore as an employer, it's got around about 150 people at any given point, which means that it'll be one of Rotorua's larger employers. You know, each and every one of those people lives and works in this environment. Their families and their whānau are all benefited by the employment that they hold with Infracore. And for that reason, it becomes very important, not just for the employees, but for me as the guy that's running the show, I suppose, to ensure that they're in a good place, that they're looked after in their workplace, they're treated fairly and reasonably, and that they deliver the outcomes that we are obliged to deliver back to council, back to community, with the ratepayers' money. If we just take a moment to look at the COVID-19 redeployment programme, it's the outline of it was to employ 25 people for a 3-month period to deliver rural culvert and vegetation control back to Stavros' operations team, and in conjunction with his team there. It was a very short and sharp recruitment and mobilisation. You know, it's not something to be taken lightly. We had three weeks to employ those people, so it was not just a case of people knocking at the door. We had to go out and recruit them. We had to work with our partners to get people to meet the criteria that had been affected by COVID-19, that were from certain parts of the community, if you like. Out of the 25 people that we successfully recruited, there was a good spectrum of society in there, both male and female, young and old, all had some sort of COVID-19 story behind them. We also had to get the plant and equipment in place and get some additional vehicles quickly, and Stavros' team obviously provided us with the programme of work. So it was a mission, but it was successfully achieved. And 3 weeks later, or over two consecutive weeks, actually split into 2 groups. Those people were inducted. They were delivered first aid training, traffic control training, and also manual handling training. And they were work fit very quickly. Now, some of those people, you've got to understand, hadn't come from a manual working background. A lot of them were from hospitality, tourism, etc., etc. So for some of these people, it was quite a new experience. working in rural Rotorua in the winter in a very manual job. Nonetheless, it was a very successfully delivered program. Now, of course, a massive part of the key outcome, I suppose, was to deliver positive outcomes for those employees and the people in the whānau around them. Now, I won't read them out verbatim, but you'll see up on the screen there, there's a general theme from the feedback received by the employees that, they welcomed the opportunity to work. They were able to contribute towards their households, pay their rent, and find that there is a future out there that looks quite different perhaps to the future that they planned for themselves, but nonetheless this was a realisation that maybe the pathway into the future could look quite different for them versus what they had envisaged on an earlier day. So 25 people coming to the end of this program actually this week and next week, and a small extension for some of them with some more work that we've got for them to do. We've managed to employ one of those people into full-time employment with Infocor. There's another 3 that are working through the recruitment process at this moment, so hopeful for those guys. And there's a further 3 that left slightly early because they had been fortunate enough to get full-time employment, which is great, as that was the actual objective of it, I suppose. For the guys that are left, though, it's a difficult situation. They always knew it was coming to an end. It was a fixed-term contract. But we've taken it upon ourselves to do the best by those guys that we can. So aside from internally offering them support with writing their CVs and giving them some interview techniques and some practice, we've also been working with a number of organisations and companies. So there's conversations going on with Higgins, Allied Workforce, NZ Labour Hire, and then of course MSD. MSD have been lined up. So what they're trying to do is create almost like a mini job fair so that local employers can see this resource and then recruit them accordingly. So our intent is, whilst we can't necessarily give all of them full-time employment forever, we have made them, if you like, work fit. We give them a reference, we help them with their CV, we help them with some interview techniques, and then we put them in touch with partnerships that hopefully will have some offerings for them in the future. There is, of course, the medium to long term as well, where over time Infocor obviously has a certain level of attrition. Those jobs will go out to the open market. The people now that know what it's like to work for Infocor and the security that provides for them, I would expect would motivate them to be applying for those roles as they come through. And as you know already, all vacancies in Infocor don't just go out in the traditional channels of Seek and Trade Me, but they also go out into the iwi trust groups and a number of other places, including the unions as well. So, there's some good lines of communication there. As far as Infocor as a business, now it's no good delivering social outcomes if you're not running a tight business. That's obviously very important, and one of the accountabilities I guess that Infocor has got is that I need to be able to demonstrate to the ratepayer that we're delivering efficient services and therefore giving value for money. So in a pure business sense, we do have a business optimisation program. The intent is that that's not a short to medium endeavour, that just runs, that becomes the way that we run the Infocor business. And we're continually looking for areas of opportunity, not just to cut costs, but to remove waste more so, to increase utilisation, to drive higher production rates and therefore create better efficiencies that will allow us to offer lower pricing back to the council to deliver the services. There's a list here of, I guess, the essence of what we're what we're achieving. So, you know, as I always say, if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. The measuring starts with data capture. What we like to call these days big data seems to be the terminology. So everything we do every day is capturing data that allows us to analyse it, right? So, you know, previously we've reported that we've brought in a new finance system. Leveraged off of that is the workflow management system, directly links into it. And then on the back of that, there's a mobile workflow system that goes out to the guys in the road where they collect their work on the devices. So whilst they're doing their timesheeting, whilst they're capturing the metrics back for invoicing purposes, that's given us average time per task and, you know, data such as that. We've also introduced the point of sale system into the Infocore nursery. That also is leveraged off of the finance system, so that data is directly going back into the system. From that, we can understand like average sale values, times of day, certain products, etc., that allows us to conduct analysis and understand how we can make that business more successful. In the same flavour, our fleet management system and the GPS links also are providing data around not just the usage and speeding and fuel usage and the traditional type of stuff, but it's also giving us metrics on idling time. You know, idling time, if we can measure that, then that allows us to work on reducing that. If we can reduce it, obviously has a positive impact on our emissions and our carbon levels. What brings all of that together is, okay, capturing the data, but, you know, often businesses do that and they don't actually use it, they don't actually do anything with it. We've now got Power BI dashboard reporting now. That basically is, that's what provides the reporting dashboard, if you like. It draws live data from all of the systems behind it, which is all of those things and more, and puts it into a simple format that allows us to look at it on a daily basis with live data in real time that allows us to make sensible decisions throughout the month with regards to managing that business. Now, we're at a position now, I suppose, probably 3 months, 4 months into that, where it's not just the senior leadership team looking at those dashboards, it's now the operational managers in the field and even the supervisors as well. Now, it's going to be a journey for those guys and we're helping them through it, but already we can see that the power of decision-making or solid decision-making based upon the evidence that is in front of them allows them to sort of make lead decisions rather than everything being in lag format behind. Now that makes us agile, it allows us to be dynamic, and allows us to make real-time decisions rather than a month ago or a financial quarter ago. Yeah. So in summary, this is a very short presentation, but in summary, looking back over not just the last quarter but the last financial year, I've put a tick by all of those aspects there. Now, I honestly believe in my heart that they're true. They're all, they should be recognised. They're all measurable. The evidence is behind it. They're not subjective. You know, they're objective measures. For me, I find it quite satisfying from where the business was when I took it over and the remit I was given, I suppose, of, you know, these are the outcomes that we need from Infocore. How can we achieve them? Whilst I do acknowledge that there's more to be done, in the time that we've had afforded to us to date, I think that's a good set of results. And speaking on behalf of the Infocore team, you know, I think it's safe to say that we're very proud of what has been achieved. You don't achieve things like that, though, if you don't have support, and, you know, we have had the support of good high-level and good quality engagement with both the council executive and also on an individual basis from the councillors as well. So, you know, for this moment in time, I think we should take some comfort that we're tracking in the right direction, and more good stuff can be achieved in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matt. We'll go to questions. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Matt, that's an outstanding year or report for the Q4 quarter. When you go back over the previous years, loss, small surplus, loss, and to get to that stage this year in this environment is absolutely fantastic. Well done there. But also knowing that program for helping 25 people to understand the value of work and to love doing the job, and some of them getting a full-time job is music to our ears, really. When we first proposed Infracore, I remember Councillor Rotorua Tate wanting it to be really a sort of social sector responsibility. And out of COVID, this is one of our loveliest stories about the Rotorua Way. So well done leading that culture and even coming in within budget. The other bit of feedback that I wanted to give, it's not really a question, was the impact on our gardens is absolutely stunning. And we opened the marathon on Saturday, and even though it wasn't the normal sized field, those from out of Rotorua just were raving about how beautiful the place is. And that's that sense of pride that you give us as a council about our place, and it's just so noticeable from other councils. I think when we're into the workshop planning at the moment, I'd love to hear your aspiration for where you'd like to take the business next, which is something we don't usually have the benefit of having you at a workshop. But as a CCO, where would you really like to take the business into the future?
I think undoubtedly there's a couple of key things that are extremely important to me and near to my or close to my heart. And that is, first and foremost, it's a business that's got to be run efficiently. It needs to be transparent. We need to be able to demonstrate we're always looking for continuous improvement. And we can never rest on our laurels, and we shouldn't. But I guess the traditional view of a successful business is normally the profit margin that it makes. In this sense, though, I think that we need to review that measure and look at the social outcomes that it's delivering, but not at the cost of running an efficient business, right? And this, I guess, is the bit that is critical to me. Is that first and foremost, for the last dozen or so years, I've run businesses to recover them and make money. And that brings a certain level of satisfaction, but it's nothing like the satisfaction that putting those 25 people for a 3-month term delivers to you. If you could somehow crystallise that format and make that part of the way that you're doing business, then it becomes a really powerful tool. Not just for the community, but the actual people within it and the pride that brings. I mean, one of the things that stands out to me is that when you actually look at what has been achieved with regards to staff engagement, now the discretionary effort over the last 12 months, this is according to our employee survey, has gone up 12 points to 81%. Now, discretionary effort is key to delivering any outcomes in any business, but 81% I would say is particularly high. The staff engagement levels are up 12 points to 73%. Again, it's quite a phenomenal number. And it isn't at the cost of safety, which is also, safety has jumped up 16% to 79%. From a worker's perspective, it is quite incredible, I think. So it's clear to me that we're capable of delivering those results. It's clear to me that we're capable of delivering those social outcomes efficiently. What we need, I suppose, is the opportunity to do that on a broader scale.
Thank you. Ms. Bray.
Kia ora, Matt. Under your commentary, under the heading revenue, can you explain a little bit more about that nursery revenue for the years down 210?
Down 200k thereabouts. The nursery, we have to understand, was in an awkward position during lockdown. For the first couple of weeks there, we weren't actually allowed to enter the nursery at all. We did get dispensation eventually to get back in there to maintain the biological life was the phrase that we were given. But what we couldn't do was sow any new seeds. Literally, we couldn't undertake new activity. Right, we could only sustain what we had. The impact of that is that it disturbed the biannual workflow for the delivery of flowers to other councils, and just lost a massive revenue gap, basically.
Thank you.
So that's the core of it. There's a couple of sub-aspects to it, but that's the material.
Thank you.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Matt, in these very challenging COVID times, I really feel good about the 25 people that you took on board and gave them an opportunity. And even though it's only one that's got a permanent position with Infocor, that is still success to me. And from day one, I've always liked your attitude towards helping people who are in tough times. So the social good year is excellent. The question is, other than now, are the media aware, because I think this is such a positive story about the ones we've helped, but especially somebody getting a permanent position in our organisation?
I think it's a very powerful story, and it's an excellent media story. Looking to Felix, it's it probably isn't known widespread enough, and there is an opportunity to get that message out there. Sure.
Thank you. Councillor Rakaute.
Thank you, Matt. I just hope that I fully appreciate that COVID has had an impact on the bottom line, but I do hope that this business will make some money and be able to sustain itself over a number of years, because I've heard similar from, I think, 3 CEOs that we've had in your position, or you're the third one. So, and it seems to me it's a repetition so often of culture change, the necessity, all of that sort of stuff. So I just want to make sure it makes money, that would be, and to be sustained. But a couple of things. Great that 25 people were able to be assisted. It does always worry me that within 3 months, those 25 people are put back into wherever they are, wherever they've come from. And that's always been the problem with people who have been unemployed. They get so excited when they can come and work, and you've seen in some of the comments here, I can pay my own bills now, I can contribute to the rent. But then when they're put aside, and because, the 3 month contract has finished, I always feel very sad for them, because many of them will slip back into where they've come from. But I do remember, and I've got Bryce sitting here, I remember, and I just hope that you perhaps will not overlook the Chamber of Commerce, because they're not all just, business people and uptown folks. You've got other business people in manufacturing and in other areas that link into and are members of the Chamber of Commerce. Mm-hmm. So I'd like to think that there might be some way that some of these people could be picked up. I did hear you say that some of them are women, and when people say that, I always want to be specific. Of the 25, how many were women? And the reason I ask that is we have a significant number of women who are solo parents. And so it's always my wish to make sure that the job offers, or the training offers are actually extended to women as well, and not just the odd, token 2 or 3 out of 25. So those are really significant points that I just wanted to raise with you. And I do hope in the training that license training, motor license training might have been part of it, because usually that's the first time young people have a brush with the law, is when they have no license or they've got a learner's license and they're driving and all of this sort of stuff. So,
Yeah.
and I know you've probably picked all of that up again, but I'm pleased that you were able to, pick up on the 25 people, but I just hope that all effort will be made to ensure that of those 25, 15 just don't go back to where they've come from. Thank you.
Absolutely, and solid comments there. With regard to the 25 people and going back to the situation that some of them were in before this, we've got to know these people, right? They've become our employees, and it's difficult to let them go. But whilst we're managing an efficient business over here, we can't be over-resourced, because that's obviously at a cost that's going to prevent us from being efficient. But what I can say is that we have worked long and hard over a period of weeks, knowing that this was always going to come to an end, to explore all avenues to either be awarded more work, playing an active part in the submissions to PGF for further funding, working with council to see what other work packets can be delivered, and there is a piece of that. Let's say that Higgins, as I understand it, one person's moving into an apprenticeship, which is great. The efforts have been broad and deep. It isn't an acceptance from our perspective that it comes to an end and we wash our hands. There's no obligation other than our own moral obligation, I suppose, to go to the lengths that we've gone to, because we truly believe that's the right thing to do. So I understand your concerns, but please be reassured that we have gone to great lengths. With regards to the repetition of the message from the Chief Executive of the day sitting in Infocor, completely understand that as well. I will say to you that as long as I'm sitting in this chair, you will continue to get good results. I won't put a number on it, but I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think any previous CE that sat here for Infocor has actually been able to put their hand on their heart and deliver this set of results, even though they may have made the promises up front. Now, there'd be reasons for that, and I'm not critiquing any predecessors. But what I would like to say is that I think between all involved parties, there's a good level of alignment now as to the purpose of Infocor and what we are there to deliver. And I'm certainly seeing the support from council to provide me with the work to be able to deliver those outcomes. Now, as long as all of those things remain in alignment, I don't see that we should have any concerns in that respect.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and you've put that quite well, because clearly the evidence that you give us is a good report on how well you're doing in your leadership, but also how well Infocor is delivering under some incredibly challenging circumstances, so thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Chair. I want to endorse the comments made by a number of people about the success evident in evidence about social and business outcomes. I had a couple of other questions, but they've been more or less covered, to do with the continuing reliability of the nursery business plan. Yeah. We can leave that for the moment, and also to do with the end of the MSD subsidy. That must be something you'll have to strategise. But from feedback from contractors, there is a question of how we reconcile the need to sustain the competitive advantages that Infocor has with the need to help sustain the local economy when contributing, when there's contraction going on, in two senses, in the context, because we've got this buy local policy. And it's a bit unfair to ask you that question, how we reconcile those two pressures, and perhaps the Chief Executive might have some comments on this as well. But you've got these two pressures, one to sustain your competitive advantages, but on the other hand, having a responsibility to enable contracts to go outside to some of Infocor's competitors. And this is managed by the council. Mm-hmm. So I'd be interested in your views on that, and perhaps the Chief Executives.
Yeah.
I might just ask
that's right.
our Chief Executive to comment on that, because it's kind of from a governance perspective, it's the direction that we give Matt and his team. So I hand it over to Jeff Williams.
Thank you, through the chair. So just stating the obvious, I think first is that Infocor is a CCO, which means that it's a council-owned and controlled entity. So council is therefore clearly obliged to ensure that it is viable and able to meet the expectations which have been communicated from council. You'll be aware that next year, I think in February, Matt, the organisation will actually submit a draft statement of intent that you will have the opportunity to see and to comment on, and that is really the direction setting mechanism that actually occurs on an annual basis. Matt has reported today on a set of KPIs and achievements which really stem from the statement of intent. So without an organisation that is operating viably, then he would not be able to achieve that. What excuse me, what our role is to actually ensure that Infocor, as I say, has got an adequate amount of work and funding available to actually assure viability. And it is actually that balance that we look to achieve. Additional work outside of what Infocor undertakes is put to the private sector, and actually in part some of the work that Infocor has traditionally done over the years has also been put to the private sector, and Infocor has actually been a tenderer involved in a competitive tendering process actually for that. So you're correct, it is actually to some degree a balance, but the overriding requirement is that of viability, and that the organisation has to be able to respond to the expectations that you set through the agreement around the statement of intent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Waru.
Tēnā koe te chairman. Kia ora, Matt. Thank you for your report. Very heartfelt, because one of those 25 was one nephew of mine.
Oh.
So who unfortunately lost, due to COVID and everything, lost his job in the bush. So he was, it was good to see him out and about again. It gave him a new lease of life. And he's actually gone on and found some more mahi because you supported him. So thank you. Tuatu tērā. I think I heard you allude to it. I just wrote it down on my notes thing here. When you talked about the fleet.
Yep.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if I heard right. But yeah, it's good to see the modernisation of the fleet and the use of the GPS to reduce fuel and all that kind of stuff. But how does the fleet replacement align with the RRC climate change action?
Okay.
Or action plan, rather. Sorry.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that we held off of replacing the fleet that has been replaced is that, as you're probably aware, the vehicles are purchased through the all of government mechanism, albeit they're leased. They're still purchased through that mechanism. So therefore, we're limited to what's on that list. The vehicles that we have replaced at this point are the best vehicles that can be selected from the available list. It's a simple answer.
Kapai, thank you, Matt. Yeah, I just wanted to ask. I was just in my mind for some reason. Not a criticism at all. I'm quite, how do you kwa na takakako, and I'm very happy about what's been reported. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Matt. We appreciate your presentation and the good update on what you've managed to, the positive things you've managed to achieve through a very challenging time for our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Kiara.
I'd now like to invite Mark Gibb up to speak to the Airport Limited presentation. And Peter, I see, is joining us as well. So we are now on page 47 of our agenda. Welcome, guys, and the floor is yours.
Kia ora, everyone. Look, we'll take it as read, the report for FY20 Q4. What I'd like to focus on today is just to walk you through a brief presentation on the airport's response to COVID. From an airport's point of view, COVID has been extremely challenging for us for the last 6 months, and this was briefly touched on last time we presented to you. So I'd just like to step through that in a bit more detail, provide you with the highlights, the lowlights, and a general view in and around some guidance on the financial and some of the other metrics impacts resulting from the last 6 months. So first off, I'm not going to go through this verbatim, but the key messages here is when COVID hit, the airport was in a very strong position from a business continuity perspective. For those that can cast their minds back some 6 months, 25th of March, we ended up escalating to alert level 4. On the 16th of March, we gathered the team together. It was very clear in terms of how things were likely to roll out operationally and in terms of direct impact on passenger movements. And we put in place a number of steps at that juncture to ensure that the business remained operational, remained financially viable, and most importantly that the staff and the people utilising the airport could do that in a safe and efficient manner. How we did this, one of the critical issues for us was we were caught in the middle of a half-built terminal. So for those that can remember back to May, we'd completed the arrivals hall, the link walkway was under construction, and in terms of the departures hall, we had about 20% of that building operating. 6 days before alert level 4 hit, we ended up removing the contractor from site, which caused us to take a number of steps in and around, I suppose, managing pedestrian flows through the building. But the critical thing here was the airport remained operational. There was a massive focus in on hygiene and around contact tracing as that started to evolve back at the time. In terms of our staff structure and how we responded in terms of the people element, contextually, we have a team of 12.4 FTEs that are employed by rail and run the airport. On a normal working day, we open the gates at 5:15 and we generally shut at about 10:45 through to midnight, basically. And between midnight and 5:15 a.m, we do remain operational, but we simply control the airfield from Christchurch in terms of navigation systems and lights. And we generally have coverage as part of that team. So the 12.4 FTEs covers management, marketing, operations, our digital media platforms, upkeep, terminal cleaning, hygiene, operations, security, fire. So it's a broad basket of skills the team possesses. Through the support of the board, we took a very early view that we wanted to hold the team together. Everyone that operates within the airport company is specialised by virtue of their role, and there's significant training and a significant investment that goes into these folks. So in order to remain viable, we needed to repoint our direction. And as part of it, we basically took our annual works plan. In an airport being an airport, we have a significant reliance on preventative and cyclical maintenance. And we bought that in-house, and with the skill sets that we have through the foreign operations teams, we basically redeployed people. So across runway maintenance, ground maintenance, painting, carpentry, fencing, you name it, the team picked up tasks that were typically going to be outsourced and brought them in-house, so we could utilise our skills through the quieter periods when a lot of the passenger aircraft movements had reduced. And to give you a feel of that, in May, typically we'd facilitate around 23,000 movements. We had 4 passengers come through the airport on that month. So there was a catastrophic collapse in passenger movements, but essential flights and other services remained. In and amongst basically repointing the business in terms of our key workflows, significant training. So with the new operations manager that we brought on board, there was a tremendous opportunity for the team to upskill. And for those that have seen the Panther, there's a huge upside with that vehicle in and around utilising its capabilities from a foreign operations perspective. So the team was able to use the time valuably in and around that. We also significantly, in terms of the runway surface, one of the big challenges we did have this year was shutting down and decommissioning elements of the runway surface as we completed quite a significant maintenance and works program. So I've just noted there, we completed 7,800 linear metres of crack and joint repair works, which was done in and amongst a lot of remarking and other work out onto the surface. So COVID, in a funny way, provided a fantastic window for us to step in and actually complete that body of work. Outside of that, from a commercial perspective, there were a number of things that were achieved. First off, the master plan was resolved, and again, back into late April, early May, an opportunity was presented to the airport through council to look at CIP applications. We, with the support of council, aggregated 2 applications and submitted those to CIP, and they were firstly for the area that we refer to as Precinct B, being the General Aviation Precinct, and secondly, an area that picks up the proposed roundabout and more of a business feel to it with the realigned heliport, etc. So those applications went in. What it did for us is it provided a really focused window of 6 weeks to advance the master plan, the business plan and the feasibility to a point in which we have the benefit of that work now, in which we can advance forward on either of those fronts, and I'll touch on that again very shortly. We completed a certification of our safety management system, which is a 5-year certificate the airport now has, and that was done in the world of Zoom. So CAA Zoomed us and audited us for 2 days remotely from Wellington. So that was an interesting process to be involved with, and one that we were successful in. And we also completed and punched out digitally the first edition of HRMI magazine. For those that have seen it, a copy's online, accessible through the website or any of our other digital platforms. And we've just actually released the spring edition, and that's had tremendous and really positive feedback from our customers, airport occupiers and the broader community. That's a document that we prepare fully internally. A lot of positive social media messaging. So again, for those that follow us, we try to stay really connected with our customers through the process of COVID. And there were a lot of updates in and around Air New Zealand. And I've just noted in there also, we had other airlines in Origin visiting. They were dropping off military personnel. We had significant and large number of medical flights, and that's medical evacuation, Starship, organ transfers, those types of things that go on 24/7 basically. So that process worked for us well. So we were connecting with the customer base every 2 to 3 days. And again, with the benefit of hindsight, it's something that I believe we did really well. In and amongst what was going on with COVID and all the challenges we had, Airways came at us in early April. And again, I've covered this off in the past with a proposal to remove the tower from Rotorua. So that was a position that the company steeled up on. We didn't believe it was in the best interest of the city, nor the company commercially, nor from a safety point of view. That culminated in the matter going through to the High Court, and a confidential settlement was reached between RAL and Airways, which effectively sees the tower remaining ensconced and operating as is through to May 2021. And now that date of May 21 provides us with an opportunity to reset a sensible process and one in which the safety and the operational necessity of the tower is considered by ourselves, all the airport users, and we've recently convened workshops with I think 18 users, so that covers everyone from volcanic. It looks at the operation and the interface of the lakefront, the hospital, heliports, all the different users that utilise our airport, from general aviation right through to jet traffic, etc. And looks to make a decision based on a whole series of evidence input and risk modelling. Why that's really important is the proposal originally by Airways took a view that they would make a group of staff redundant and then make a determination with respect to the tower. And our view was simply that was back to front. The future necessity and the form and shape of the tower should have been considered before any decision was made in and around people. So we've got a sensible process that's been agreed. We're working through it. And we anticipate being in a position from a management point of view to put our recommendations up to the board. And as you'll appreciate, there is a really significant safety and liability issue here if there was a potential removal of the tower, and a significant and potential consequence of other users of the system within Rotorua, in which if the tower was removed, potentially there would be a significant reduction in the ability for general aviation to operate the way they do within a controlled airspace environment. So that recommendation will look to go up to the board pre-Christmas, and then from there that goes to the Civil Aviation Authority for review and final determination. So we're in the middle of that process at the moment, as are Invercargill Airport and a number of the other airports, the other 5 airports that were impacted by this decision. The financial impact of COVID. So again, an airport being an airport, airports nationally have borne the brunt of the restrictions in COVID. And there's a couple of key metrics, and it's probably a bit unfair to say it's a year of 2 halves. It felt a bit like a year of 3 quarters and 1 quarter. In the sense of March 2020, we were tracking to a record year in terms of passenger movements and in terms of financial performance for the company. So we were in the green on all metrics, and things were looking very positive. COVID hit. It took us over the period of 3.5 months from a potential target of around 280,000 passenger movements, taking some 60,000 movements straight off the top of that. So it was a really significant hit in terms of a reduction in passenger movements. And every time we have a reduced passenger movement, that affects our car parking revenue, that affects the concession revenue. In and amongst this, we were standing up terraced kitchen or terraced airside also, and as a consequence, directly and indirectly through all the other operators on the airport, taxi companies, rental car companies, ramp services, etc. So the consequences cut deep economically and operationally, and they happen very quickly. So the 2 key numbers here, one that we had a reduction in and around 60,000 passenger movements, and the forecast guidance that we'd published around March is looking to prevail year end, in which we'll have a reduction in revenues of around about $610,000. If you translate that through, from a general EBIT perspective, the company has performed and continues to perform well. The significant impact here will be in around the inability to fully fund depreciation. And I can go into that in a bit more detail should people wish. But the critical message here is, from a solvency perspective, we're solid. From a value perspective, we're solid. Over the last 4 to 5 years, we've built significant retained earnings, and the value of the company has gone from some $47 million 2 years ago to around $67 million in current terms. So we are well buffered in terms of value, and we are well buffered in terms of our cash position and retained earnings to weather the storm. Just wrapping up what we did for our community. So again, we've really tried to keep this real around what our role was through the period of COVID, and really the number one goal was to remain open. 24/7 and to ensure that our people who operated under a high degree of pressure through the period of COVID could do it in a safe manner. And I'm hugely gracious to was hugely thankful to our staff that operated through this period. Again, some context, we ended up in early March splitting our roster down to teams of 2, and the reason for that was if someone was sick or whether it be cold or COVID situation, the airport could remain operational. So the teams did some tremendously long hours to keep it going, 15-hour shifts. But it basically meant that we could operate safely and we had a degree of redundancy there should we need to call on it. Over the period of lockdown, we had some 35 lifeline and essential service flights through the airport. So again, each time they come in and operate, we need to be absolutely accurate and seamless in terms of how we facilitate, and they can happen at a high degree of pace. So our staff, again, had full PPE and protective uniforms through the period of moving a series of patients, a number with life-threatening illnesses and other things going on in a safe and efficient manner. So again, the team did tremendously well through that. And again, we interfaced really well with the other organisations. So again, huge thanks to the council. The weekly calls that we jumped in on through the period of COVID were great in terms of understanding how council and the other CCOs and organisations were operating, but also morally, it was great for the team to be involved as a broader Rotorua coalition to deal with the COVID consequence. So that's it, but look, either myself or Peter would be very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Donaldson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Mark. Good to see you, Peter, for a great report on an unprecedented quarter. Congratulations on the efforts to retain staff. I'm just interested in how you've fared in retaining tenants and whether, within the constraints of commercial sensitivity, whether you were in a position where you had to assist them with business continuity or business support, and have you kept all your tenants in place, basically? That's the question.
Yes, look, it'd be fair to say that the direct commercial impact of COVID started to become apparent with the tenants from April. We were approached by a number, and we're still dealing with that today. So we're sitting this month at around 70% of operational capacity relative to 12 months ago. But it'd be fair to say that right through from F&B through to the rental car businesses, etc., they are all feeling the pain of the current process. We have maintained 100% retention rate, so no businesses has fallen at the airport as a result of it, and we are working daily with the tenants in and around the challenges they have, with a view that that we're in the long game here. A number of the businesses have been very good to us over the years and good to the city, and it's really important that we understand their pain and we share in that to a greater or lesser extent. So where possible, Councillor, we are working primarily to ensure that they can remain commercially viable, and secondly, that they fundamentally survive the challenges of COVID.
Your Worship, the Mayor.
Yes, well done during a dreadful time, and it was great that you remained operational, just, and what an impact for us as a country, really, on domestic tourism. But my issue is around the aeronautical study, because that's going to be a critical bit of analysis for us about the role and the value of our airport to us locally. So are we doing an economic impact as part of that on if we ever lost our airport? Because I think this is a great opportunity, seeing post-COVID, well, we're not post, but COVID recovery. If we lost this asset, what would that mean to the district of Rotorua? I wanted to know whether that's going to be included in the aeronautical study and our response there post-mediation.
Yeah, look, Peter may wish to comment on this also, but look, The aeronautical study is a statutory tool that's utilised by the Civil Aviation Authority to make a determination around the control of airspace. So whilst it would be advantageous to wind into the study the commercial impact of the removal of the tower, we're limited in our ability to do that. So the aeronautical study ostensibly is a safety assessment, but it does drag with it very quickly the economic consequence. And I'll give you an example of this. Under our general peak operation requirement, we can generally facilitate around 6 to 8 aircraft in what we call a controlled airspace at any one point in time. And that could be movements into the hospital, there could be float planes lifting off, there could be a movement from the lakefront heliport to Skyline. We could have a New Zealand aircraft coming in, we could have agricultural operations, we could have other helicopters, and we could have flight school movements, all happening at the same time. If we moved away from a controlled airspace to an uncontrolled model, the general view is an equivalent safety outcome would be one in which there was only one movement in the circuit at any time. And that could be an Air New Zealand movement, for argument's sake, because that's the only way that you can deliver the equivalent form of safety. And the folks that assess this stuff run it through a series of pretty sophisticated algorithms in which they can model the crash risk and fundamentally having multiple operations occurring at a single point in time in an uncontrolled airspace environment. So there is an economic consequence of going uncontrolled. The second phase of that is, yes, we are doing a piece of work and looking to activate a piece of work in and around the economic importance of the airport and the potential consequence of a loss of the tower. So there's sort of two elements to that, but both have risen to the surface as a result of the study, and they will be items that we've been talking to a number of other organisations in the city about to ensure that we have a joined up view on the economic importance in the GDP and the job impact of the airport.
Thank you very much. Councillor Okawate.
Thank you very much. Look, I was just sitting here and thinking, that damn COVID has a lot to be answerable for, doesn't it? Especially when you think of the wonderful prediction of your record high, which we would have all loved to have shared in. So that's, but can I just say as a frequent flyer, how much I enjoy going out to the airport now earlier, and actually even enjoy it when I come back in, especially if the restaurant's open. But no, it's just a pleasure. It's you know, when you first mooted that plan, and it was quite an audacious one, obviously, and the development, it is lovely, and it's a pleasure to there. So I just wanted to put that on the table for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yates.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, tēnā kōrua. I just have one question, and it's whether or not you've got any preliminary feedback from the MOU with Ngāti Uenuku Kōpako.
No. I've had, we continue to have regular dialogue on many fronts, and we've got a number of initiatives that we are rolling out through the course of the balance of the year. We have the renaming of the main street coming into the airport. We have the carvings that were originally embellished the entrance of the building that have been upgraded and will be unveiled on the Armistice Day celebration. And again, we're looking to have our regular Armistice Day celebration in Kukapako. So, but I have yet to have a formal response to the MOU, but I gather it's pending.
Look, well, thank you very much to both Mark and Peter. We appreciate your update, and I do just want to put on the table a big thanks and acknowledgement for the work that you've done to keep our air traffic control tower, because that not only services us as the airport, but also I believe down in the lakefront and the hospital as well. So maintaining those services really is crucial for Rotorua and our wider district. So I want to thank you for the time and the effort that's going into retaining that for our community. Thank you very much. And I would like to welcome Joe. So I invite Joe Holmes to the table to give us an update on our CCO Rotorua Economic Development.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora koutou.
As with the other CCOs, I'll take the report as read, and I think that covers in quite a lot of detail our COVID response and what we've done throughout that period. So I'm going to use this time to take you through a short summary of a few of the economic development projects that the team is working on in partnership with Rotorua Lakes Council, which is kind of summarises some of the priorities from an economic recovery perspective. Then I'll touch on some new funding, put that forward, and what we're doing with some of that, and then use the majority of the time to share some insights from some brand new research that we've conducted, which is helping us get a really good picture of post-COVID visitor industry. So to start with, as I was saying, I wanted to remind you just of some of the projects that the RED team is working on in partnership with RLC's Economic Recovery Task Force. Some of these will be coming to the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee over the coming weeks, when you'll get more detail. So this is just a really brief overview, just to show the breadth of work that the team is involved in. I have a number of slides, but I'm going to go through very quickly. So if you've seen the presentation, it's not as long as it may look. So the first of these is the work that the team is doing to deliver a feasibility study or pilot into a geothermal greenhouse pilot. The team is working on their business case and currently exploring potential locations for that pilot. And this project fits really well with our focus on supporting the development of local food production in the Rotorua region and that concept of food provenance. The second body of work is really building on the work of the Whakahohia Te Whare Ohanga City Sector Group that came out of the COVID recovery response, and their recommendations to create a city plan and curate city activations. And it's part of RED's work to demonstrate that Rotorua is open for business. There's a number of projects within that covers land and urban development, creating jobs, city vitalisation, and obviously this inner city living, and that all comes into this project. And currently they're working on the consolidation of the most relevant and current urban design frameworks to create a master plan, CBD master plan. The next project is, had some great news obviously over the last few weeks with the opening of the Wairiki Film Studio in White Street. This is a new venture between Steambox Film Collective and Film Bay of Plenty, and RED worked closely with them to secure funding and to help them find a suitable location for this temporary studio. So it's the first stage of a larger film production development project, and we're continuing to talk to landowners to identify greenfield sites for a larger development in the future. And then the final project in this area that I wanted to touch on is the RFP process for the new Forest Hub 2 in Tarawera Road. So RED has managed that request for proposal process, including inviting appropriate and interested parties who are looking to either establish a new business or expand existing ones. So the panel has shortlisted 2 complementary businesses, and they're now negotiating concession terms with a view to businesses being in place to open really soon. So as I mentioned, the second topic that I wanted to touch on is just some relatively new funding, and we'll just give you an overview of what we're doing with that. The first is the Strategic Tourism Asset Protection Program funding from MB. So RED has received $1 million of that, which was the maximum allocation to the regional tourism organisations, and the money was to be made available for those 3 areas, so destination management and planning, domestic marketing and capability building within the tourism area. So in order to get that funding, we had to set out a business plan, and in that plan we set out our intent to use the funding to create a destination management plan for Rotorua in consultation with Rotorua Lakes Council, with Te Tato or Te Aroa, and local businesses involved in that space. We also committed to doing a deep dive into customer or to visitor intent and perceptions of Rotorua to really understand the market and the changes that have taken place, obviously, given the fact that we're in a very different world to where we were this time last year. And we've already used that, and I will give you a quick summary of what that research has brought to light. We're investing in new destination collateral and imagery, and that's for the benefit of the destination from a marketing perspective, but it also gives operators collateral that they can use, and we're creating a centralised hub where everybody is sharing assets and able to support each other's campaigns, and also using the funding to create aspirational marketing campaigns to bring New Zealanders to Rotorua. So it's focused on the domestic marketing of our side of our work. It also will allow us to work in closer collaboration with other regional tourism organisations within the Central North Island. There's a campaign actually that's just gone live, I think last week, which is a collaborative road trip campaign of the RTOs working together, and also gives us funding support to work more closely with Tourism New Zealand. Another project that we've included in the business plan is work to support the business events market. It's obviously a critical one for Rotorua, given the role that events play in encouraging midweek visitation. And also funding resources will go into bringing resource in for capability building and to support businesses going through product development process and being able to play a role in that. The second area of funding that we're involved in is the recent announcement of $50 million available to stimulate domestic tourism and travel through regional events. That money has been allocated to International Marketing Alliances, or IMAs, and Rotorua is a part of an IMA with Waikato, Taupo and Ruapehu, and a panel has been created with 2 representatives from each of those regions who will now get together and allocate funding to events over the next 2 to 4 years. And again, the main aim of those events is about the impact they'll have on stimulating regional travel. One of the representatives from Rotorua is from RED, and the other one is from Rotorua Lakes Council. So I mentioned we've conducted a recent piece of research. We do an annual perception monitor every year, and this allows us to just keep a track on what people are thinking about Rotorua and their intent, monitor their intent to visit. But this year we also added a qualitative layer to that and did a real deep dive into what people are thinking about travel in general, much more around their perceptions of Rotorua and understanding of the marketing material that we put out there. So this is useful for us, but also we will be sharing this with operators, because at this moment in time, the more insights we can all use together collaboratively, the better it is for the destination. As I mentioned, this is an annual, the perception monitor is an annual process. We've been running this since 2015, which gives us a really good record of results, allows us to keep an eye on the impact of the work that we're doing from a marketing perspective, and we had about 1,000 responses. It's an online survey, this particular one. The good news is that the perceptions of Rotorua are consistent, which means that everybody's getting the same messaging from us. And when we ask, what are the words that people associate with Rotorua, the top 5 words are the ones you see there, which are all really positive and in line with what we'd like people to know about us. So for families, it's natural, scenic, outdoors. There is some differentiation. Aucklanders are more likely to see us as a family destination. And some of the more recent campaign commentary is coming through, with particularly the Elements campaign, where it's more about being good for the soul, and more recently the coming together. The reason we focus so much on the marketing is that the research also shows a correlation between the people who have seen the marketing and those who are exhibiting the behaviour that we're trying to create, which is that having a positive intent to come, staying longer, having a better than expected experience, and pre-booking accommodation. And the good news is that we got for the first time in a few years, advertising awareness has seen a significant increase. It's usually sort of up 1 or 2%. So in Auckland, 49% of people had seen something from Rotorua. And what we track as a key performance measure is what we call loyalists, and those are people who have been to Rotorua and are intending to come within the next 12 months. And again, we've seen a really good increase in 2 of our key markets, slight drop in Christchurch of 1%, so we're looking into that. But the fact that Auckland has jumped from 44% to 51% is a really positive result. As I mentioned, we also supported the more quantitative data with a really deep dive into intent. There's a lot of information, but I'm just summarising it across 3 slides. Some of the obvious hooks that you would expect that people coming here for or associate Rotorua with what somebody had referred to as the thermal delights, but the geothermal and the hot pools. But it's really great to see the broader nature story coming through as well, with the forest and the lakes really being front and centre in people's conversations with the researcher. Accessibility is great. We are really fortunate where we're located, and it's important that we make the most of that. And the fact that we're seen as a all-year-round destination is coming through really strongly, with people associating us both with summer and with winter. We're seeing more and more the importance of food and beverage on New Zealanders' decision-making when they're looking at where to go, and it's great to see that Eat Street is coming up really strongly as a recognisable feature of Rotorua, and something that unprompted people are saying, it's a great place, that's part of my decision. And then there are other products as well that we're really well known for that are bringing people here. There are some barriers, and it's interesting that there's a real divide between those people that we're calling the loyalists, so people who have been to Rotorua, and those who have not been for some time, and they're much more likely to have a negative perception. Overall, the research reported back this lack of awareness of what's on offer. So when some of those people saw the imagery of what's here, there was this surprise and sense of, wow, that's Rotorua. It's not the one I knew when I was a child. So this false sense of knowing the place is something we need to really work with. Some of the barriers we're seeing as being around infrastructure, accommodation particularly, and being driven by what's being read in the media. A belief that you need to be very careful, making a really careful decision came through, and a sense of some of the older infrastructure in the CBD also driving perceptions or a belief in that. And smell. There's not much we can do about that, but it's interesting that it comes up, and for some it's stronger, no pun intended, than others as a barrier. So it's always there. But there were some real opportunities that came through. So this overriding feeling that as New Zealanders, we want to be seen as guests. We're not tourists, we're a visitor, and so how do we convey that sense of you're welcome as whānau, you're a visitor to our place, not a tourist. Particularly from Aucklanders, what they really value in Rotorua is it's so different from home. You get the benefits of a city, but it's a world away, I think was a phrase that somebody used. So that concept of new and surprising is really important, and showing the many layers of Rotorua as a reason to return. So it's more than just all the activities, it's the access to nature, the great services we have, and the ability to meet both a need for relaxation and active adventure. So there's a huge amount of information, and I'm more than happy to go through with anyone who would like to see more, but that's just a very brief overview. And then I just want to finish on a heads up that we will be launching a new website within the next couple of weeks. This is an opportunity. It doesn't look so great as a screenshot because it's a video at the top, but it's fresher, it's newer, it's very much the first stage of a digital roadmap that will enable us to be a lot more responsive, to be a lot more balanced from a full economic development perspective. So visit's an important part of it, but as is information on businesses and investment opportunities, becoming a hub for people looking to live, work and study, and being able to provide a better source of everything that's in Rotorua from a business profile perspective, rather than just focusing so much on the tourism element. there's a whole roadmap around integration with marketing campaigns and the ability to do a lot more with the tool. So keep an eye out for that over the next couple of weeks. That's it from me. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Jo. Councillor, nope, you're scratching your nose, sorry. Councillor Yates.
Tēnā koe, and through you, Madam Chair, nei rā te mihi ki a koe, Jo. It's not so much, well, I do have a couple of things, and one of the things is that it's actually a pity that Mark isn't still here, because that Rotorua Christchurch flight would be definitely something that I think would start opening up a few things for our domestic tourism. I also wanted to just point out, sorry, and I also just wanted to point out that I'd had a conversation earlier in the week with Kingy, and around that Tūtanakai, so I noticed you've got a photo in there of the potential of what building a vibrant city might look like. And we were looking at the word key was mentioned, and I've heard spine earlier today too. Kingy referred to it as potentially a way in which we can all start potentially looking at it as te pūtorino a Tūtanakai. Because at the end of the day, when you look at how a flute is played and what all of the fabric that comes and the vibrancy that comes from that, it all stems from Tūtanakai's flutes. So he whakaaro noi hōtira, yes, and my final point just around listening to you talk and feeling excited about who we are too as community members and iwi members of Te Arawa, Rotorua. One of the key things for me also is to perhaps have more of our stories integrated into unlocking our potential, because it is through the stories, not just the myths, that people will have a greater ownership of who they are and who they are when they come to Rotorua. So kia ora for your presentation today.
Kia ora, Councillor Yates. And yes, just to touch on a couple of points, the Christchurch connection is one that we are really focusing on. I think now is the time more than ever where Rotorua is more of an option for South Islanders, and we are looking over summer to do a focus campaign on that market. In the past, it hasn't always been as responsive as the drive markets have been, but we see real potential now. And agree with you on the stories and the storytelling. Look forward to being able to take that forward.
Thank you. Your Worship, the Mayor.
Thank you, Jo, and also for Red's working with Council on the Build Back Better strategy. The one that's intriguing me that is gaining momentum, but I'm not sure if it's there yet, with the Waiariki Film Studio, are we able to assist with investors in that space? Is Red doing some work there? And with developers, because I know that they are saying that they might need an even bigger space. So is Red undertaking some work in there?
So as in looking for a longer term, yes, so there are conversations around identifying, talking with landowners and identifying some greenfield space for a future studio, taking that to the next level.
And are you working on the perception that that product may need investment? I just had a meeting yesterday and heard back it's a bit of a pie in the sky, and I said, no, this has got huge potential, absolutely huge potential. And I think when we're going out looking for more land for where a studio could be in the future, we've got to also sell that this product is moving at a rapid rate in terms of the ability to grow, both for Rotorua, our stories, but also nationally and internationally. I don't think that's understood.
Just tell the story.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I take that, definitely.
Thank you. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Jo. I was pleased to hear about the progress made with the film studio as well in White Street. Do we have a program of, it's capturing them, but I mean, we're really blessed in Rotorua, as you've shown in your report, the fantastic things we have to offer. What pleases me on international, worldwide occasions and opportunities, people like Israel Alasana, the kickboxing champ, the Stephen Adams, Danny Lee, these are all people that are saying things about us, which is great. It's just great. But when they come back home here, is there something we can do with them to sort of help in the promotion again? I mean, they're already doing it overseas, but we want to show that we really appreciate what they're doing. Is there something you folk have talked about, thought about?
So about using these people as
in a positive way.
Yeah, I mean, it's always the more people who are well known can say about Rotorua, it's always a positive thing. So it's a great opportunity to be seeking that. I know, we're really fortunate here with some of the, you've mentioned sports people, but also people in the film industry who call the place home. So yeah, I agree, there's potential there to be working with them.
Yes, I'm sure your team's all over it, but I mean, I guess without the international influences that Red would normally be showing around, we do still have some really good talent here in Rotorua, but here in New Zealand as well. We go to Councillor McPherson and then Councillor Donaldson.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. I refer to page 63 in the report. I'm intrigued with the way in which you've shown great flexibility on managing your finances, particularly under point number 5. But I was intrigued by comment number 1 when you said the loss will be covered by retained earnings from previous years. Do I take it from that profits and losses and debts get rolled over from year to year? How do you manage those?
My understanding is that loss has been covered by retained earnings. I'd have to come back to you on the detail behind it.
Yes, I assumed that you were using accrual accounting, you see.
I might just get Thomas to answer that. He should be able to.
Thanks.
There we go. In previous years, Red had generated end-of-year surpluses and retained those cash. Part of those those surpluses and retained cash was as a result of the timing of expenditure. And so in this fiscal year, you've seen a manifestation of all that expenditure, and they've used their cash surpluses from previous years to pay for that.
Okay, that's interesting. That took me over to page 66. I notice your key monitoring indicators are here, page 66, down the left-hand side of page 66. I wondered if these monitoring indicators will need to be reviewed in the light of COVID. How some of these priorities for monitoring going to be changing?
So the performance indicators or the
I believe so the statement of intent will be reviewed in due course because the monitoring indicators come from the statement of intent.
Correct.
They will be there until we at such time choose to change those. So a good point, but a governance question.
Yes, the intent behind the question is what learnings from the current experiences are likely to result in changes. If you'd like to post-date that discussion until early next year, I'll be happy about that.
Sure, and that is part of the conversation that I think happens every year when the statement of intent is created, according to the letter of expectation from Council.
Because your business is changing.
Oh, definitely.
I think the world's changing. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, Joe. A good problem to have, I guess, that accommodation is a barrier to Kiwis, and particularly at peak times. Can you give us a sense of the quantum or the type of accommodation that appears to be the barrier? Is it just a COVID thing? Is it because we have accommodation committed to managed isolation facilities as part of it? Or is it that Kiwis want something that we aren't offering?
No, the feedback, when we've spoken to the researcher on trying to dig into that in a little more detail, A lot of it is driven by what's being perceived as happening through media. So there are a lot of stories about both. I think we've got the two scenarios are both having an impact. So some accommodation taken up through managed isolation, some through long-term housing needs, and a sense that you've got to be really careful. I think there was a period of time where there wasn't a distinction between accommodation being provided for visitor economy and accommodation being provided for social housing. So that was this feedback was you have to pick very carefully, or you have to be very careful about the accommodation that you choose. And what that's starting to do is make people think, well, I'll look to alternative destinations, still coming to Rotorua, but not necessarily staying here. And that is the challenge for us.
Well, there appear to be no further questions. No, thank you very much, Jo. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, everyone, that actually sees our meeting come to a close. There are no further items on the agenda. I thank you for your attendance today, and also to the public and the media who were here as well. And I declare the meeting closed.
Well done.